Between 1714 and 1830, thousands of servants maintained the glittering facade of Britain's royal palaces, experiencing both the glamour and grime of court life. They ran a society built on rigid hierarchy, incredible luxury, and bizarre customs. The palace was ruthlessly efficient, glamorous, and sometimes absurd. Here's what life was really like for a servant in a Georgian royal palace. Hey, quick thing before we start. If you actually listen to these regularly, hit like or subscribe. I always wonder where everyone's at, so comment your city and what time it is. Weird to think some of you are having breakfast in London while I'm recording this at night here in the States. Alright, tonight it's Kensington Palace during the Georgian era, but hold up, get comfortable first. I'm serious. Pillows, blankets, whatever you need. You're gonna be here a while. The bells wake you first, not the gentle kind, the harsh, insistent jangling of servant bells echoing through the narrow corridors below stairs. Your eyes snap open to darkness, your body already tensing before your mind has caught up. 5 o'clock, always 5 o'clock. Your pallet is hard beneath you, just a thin mattress stuffed with straw that does nothing to cushion against the wooden slats below. Not like your plush bed now. The tiny servant's attic room is freezing in the January dawn, your breath visible in the dim light filtering through the single small window. You can hear the other servants stirring around you, 5 of you crammed into this small space with barely enough room to dress. No privacy, no comfort, just the knowledge that you need to be downstairs and working before anyone even thinks of ringing that bell again. First day, whispers Anne, the senior housemaid who's been at Kensington for 3 years, practically an eternity in service. Remember what I told you. Keep your eyes down, your mouth shut, and your ears open. You nod, fingers fumbling with the ties of your plain linen shift. This isn't some modest country house with a handful of staff. This is Kensington Palace in 1720, the beating heart of the court of King George I, with hundreds of servants rushing about in a carefully orchestrated dance of duty and deference. And you're now part of it. And for God's sake, Anne adds, don't stare at the Turks. The what? You ask, still half asleep. She rolls her eyes. The king's Turkish servants, Mehmet and Mustafa, they're higher ranked than everyone except maybe the steward. The English courtiers hate them, but they're the king's favourites. She lowers her voice. They say Mehmet examines the king's piles. You're about to ask what exactly that entails when the bell rings again, more insistent this time. That's Mistress Keene, Anne hisses, referring to the housekeeper. She'll have both our hides if we're late. 5 minutes later, you're hurrying down the servants' staircase, narrow, steep and winding, deliberately designed to keep you out of sight. Unlike the king's grand staircase, with its elaborate paintings and gilded banisters, this one is plain stone worn smooth by generations of hurrying feet. You've already banged your elbow twice on the sharp corners. The air changes as you descend, warmer, filled with the smell of baking bread and wood smoke from the kitchen fires that have been burning since 4. A footman rushes past, barely missing you, a silver tray balanced expertly in one hand. Watch it, he snaps, not even looking back. At the bottom of the stairs stands Mistress Keene, the housekeeper of Kensington Palace. She's a formidable woman in her 50s, with keen eyes that miss nothing and a bunch of keys hanging from her waist, the symbol of her authority. Next to her stands Mr. Hamilton, the butler, tall and imposing in his formal livery despite the early hour. "Late," Mistress Keene says simply as you arrive, slightly breathless. "Not an auspicious beginning." "Sorry, ma'am," you mumble, eyes down as instructed. "Look at me when I speak to you, girl," she says sharply. Your eyes snap up to meet hers. "Better. Now, you've been hired as a housemaid, but with the Cherokee delegation arriving next month, we may need all hands for different duties. You'll go where you're told, when you're told, without question. Is that clear?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Anne will show you your duties. The palace is waking. Do not be seen by the family or the courtiers, and do not, under any circumstances, make noise. They are not to be reminded that their comforts require work. With that dismissal, you follow Anne into a world that exists parallel to the opulent splendor above, the hidden realm of the servants. First thing, Anne whispers as you hurry along a corridor, we have to light the fires in the main rooms before anyone's up. 28 fireplaces, and they all need to be cleaned out, laid fresh and lit before the family rises. 28, you repeat, dismayed? And that's just our section, Anne says with a grim smile. The palace has over 100 rooms. Good thing you're not afraid of a bit of soot. Oh, and stairs. Lots of stairs. You're carrying a heavy bucket of coal, trying to keep up with Anne's brisk pace, when you turn a corner and nearly collide with two men in elaborate, colourful clothing unlike any you've seen before. One wears what looks like a Polish fur hat above an Eastern-style undergarment and jacket. The other is similarly dressed in a fusion of European and Ottoman styles. Anne immediately presses herself against the wall, eyes downcast, and you hastily follow suit. Those are them, she breathes once they've passed. The Turks, that's Mehmet von Königstreu and Mustafa von Misitri, former prisoners of war from Ottoman Greece. Now they're the king's most trusted servants. Mehmet's the keeper of the privy purse, controls all the king's personal spending. They don't look like servants, you whisper back, remembering their rich clothes. That's the thing about court. Nothing's what you'd expect, Anne replies. Now come on, we've got fires to light. The next hour is a blur of fireplaces, sweeping out old ashes, laying fresh kindling, lighting fires and trying not to get completely covered in soot in the process, all while moving as silently as possible through the grand state rooms of Kensington Palace. Each room is more opulent than the last. Rich tapestries, gleaming furniture, priceless paintings, but you barely have time to look as you work. Don't gawk, Anne hisses when she catches you staring at an enormous painting. That's how you get noticed, and trust me, you don't want to be noticed. By the time you've finished with the fires, your back aches and your hands are filthy despite the cloths you've wrapped around them. But there's no rest. Now it's time to fetch water for the morning washing and bathing of the royal family and their guests. Water has to be hauled up from the kitchens, Anne explains, as you both pick up large copper jugs. No running water up here, so every drop has to be carried by us. The king likes his water scalding hot, and if it's cooled too much by the time it reaches his chambers... She draws a finger across her throat. The water is indeed scalding, steam rising from it as you carefully make your way up the servants' stairs, trying not to slop any onto yourself. Your arms tremble with the effort. Each jug weighs nearly 20 pounds, and this is just the first of many trips you'll make today. As you're struggling up the stairs, a bell rings sharply from somewhere above. That's the bell from the Queen's drawing room, Anne says, not breaking stride. Someone else will get that. Each bell has a different tone, and they're all connected to a board in the servants' hall. Shows which room is ringing. You'll learn them all eventually. How many are there? You ask, arms burning from the weight of the water. 56, Anne replies matter-of-factly, and you better come running when you hear yours. You reach the top of the stairs, and Anne leads you down a corridor toward the private chambers. Quick now, she urges. We need to have this water in place before... She stops abruptly as a door ahead opens. Anne immediately flattens herself against the wall again, and you copy her. Water sloshing dangerously in your jug. A group of elegantly dressed people emerge from the room, courtiers by their fine clothes. Among them is a woman so extraordinarily attired that you can't help but stare. Her dress, a mantua, stands out from her body on both sides, making her nearly 6 feet wide. The fabric is patterned silk with an elaborate embroidery of seashells. Her hair is powdered white and piled high, adding another foot to her height. She moves with small, careful steps, unable to cross her arms or sit down in the restrictive garment. 2 maids follow behind her, ready to assist with the elaborate dress at a moment's notice. "That's Lady Howard," Anne whispers once they've passed. "She's a maid of honour to the Princess of Wales. They have to wear those court dresses whenever they're on duty. Can't sit down, can barely walk, and need help using the chamber pot." She smirks slightly. "Still think the life upstairs is all glamour?" You continue on your way, passing a window that looks out over the elaborate Kensington gardens. You catch a glimpse of more finely dressed people strolling along the paths, footmen trailing discreetly behind them. "Never look out the windows when you're working," Anne admonishes. Servants don't have time for views. After delivering the water, there's still no rest. The family will be waking soon, and there are chamber pots to empty, beds to make, clothes to lay out, floors to sweep, and 1,000 other tasks that must be completed before the occupants of Kensington Palace properly begin their day. "When do we eat?" you ask Anne, as your stomach growls audibly. "We get breakfast after the family has theirs," she replies. "Around 10, if we're lucky. Hope you're not the fainting type." By the time you finally make it to the servants' hall for breakfast, you've been working for 5 solid hours without a break. Your back aches, your arms burn, and you've climbed more stairs than you can count. But you're also buzzing with the excitement of being inside the very heart of court life. The servants' hall is crowded and noisy, a stark contrast to the hushed corridors above. Here, below stairs, servants can talk and even laugh, though always with one ear cocked for the sound of bells. You take a seat at the long wooden table, careful to observe the strict hierarchy. Upper servants, the steward, housekeeper, butler, and cook, sit at the head of the table. Next come the valets and ladies' maids who serve the family directly. Then the footmen and housemaids like yourself. At the very bottom are the kitchen maids, scullery maids, and potboys, the lowest of the low. Breakfast is simple but filling. Porridge, bread, and ale. No coffee or tea. Those expensive luxuries are reserved for upstairs. As you eat, you listen to the conversations swirling around you, each one revealing another facet of palace life. "The king's in a foul mood," a valet is saying. "His piles are bothering him again. Mehmet had to examine them this morning." "Better him than me," another servant replies with a grimace, prompting muffled laughter. "Watch yourself with Lady Carlton," a lady's maid warns a footman. "She reported Jenkins for looking her in the eye, and he was dismissed without a character." "Did you hear about Peter?" a housemaid whispers excitedly to her neighbour. "The wild boy? They say the king's bringing him to court as a curiosity. Found him living in the woods near Hanover, raised by wolves or some such." "What about the Cherokee chief coming next month?" another asks. "They say he paints his face black and red and brings eagle feathers as gifts." The conversation dies as Mr. Hamilton, the butler, rises from his seat. "The king will be receiving visitors in the presence chamber at 11. Jenkins, Thomas, you'll attend. Mary, Elizabeth, you'll serve refreshments. The rest of you, to your duties. And remember, eyes down, move silently, be invisible unless required." As everyone rises to return to work, Anne nudges you. "Come on, we've got the Queen's drawing room to clean, and Mistress Keene will be inspecting it herself." "Will we see the Queen?" you ask, then immediately regret it as several nearby servants snicker. "There is no queen," Anne explains patiently as you follow her back upstairs. "The king divorced his wife years ago, caught her with a Swedish count. He keeps his half-sister Sophia Charlotte and his mistress Melusine here instead. But don't ever mention the divorce unless you want to be dismissed on the spot." The Queen's drawing room, despite its name, is now used primarily for the King's sister and her ladies. It's the largest, grandest room you've seen yet, with soaring ceilings, enormous windows overlooking the gardens, and walls covered in priceless tapestries and paintings. "We have to dust every inch," Anne says, handing you a feather duster, "including all the picture frames, furniture legs and carvings, but don't touch the paintings themselves. The king had a maid whipped for leaving a smudge on one last year. As you work, you can't help stealing glances at the paintings. One in particular catches your eye, an enormous mural showing dozens of people in various exotic costumes. Looking closer, you realise it depicts the king's court here at Kensington. "That's the king's staircase," Anne says, following your gaze. "Painted by William Kent a few years back, shows all the real people at court, even some of the servants. See there?" She points. "That's Peter the Wild Boy, and there's John Cato, the Black Trumpeter. And look, Kent even painted himself and his mistress up in the corner. There are so many different types of people," you observe, surprised by the diversity depicted. "That's court for you," Anne replies. "The king brings people from all over, not always popular with the English courtiers, mind you. They think England should be for the English." She snorts, as if any of these royals are actually English themselves. The king barely speaks the language. A bell rings suddenly, its tone distinctive even to your untrained ear. "That's the presence chamber," Anne says, immediately setting aside her duster. "The king must be receiving visitors earlier than planned. Come on, we need to make sure the fire's built up. It's freezing in there, and George hates the cold." You hurry through the palace corridors, taking care to use the servants' passages whenever possible to avoid being seen. Through one doorway, you catch a glimpse of the grand entrance to the king's state apartments, the king's staircase itself, just like in the painting. Courtiers in elaborate dress are ascending the stairs, practiced expressions of confidence on their faces, even as they clench and unclench their hands nervously. "That's how visitors enter," Anne explains as you duck down a different corridor, up the king's staircase to be intimidated by all those paintings staring down at them, then through a series of increasingly grand rooms until they finally reach the king, makes them properly humble by the time they get there. When you reach the presence chamber, you slip in through a small side door almost invisible in the panelling. The room is indeed cold despite the fire, and you immediately set to work adding more logs while Anne straightens the throne canopy. The throne itself stands empty and imposing on a dais, its rich red upholstery gleaming in the firelight. You're just finishing with the fire when the main doors open. Immediately, you and Anne press yourselves against the wall, eyes down, trying to become invisible as courtiers begin to file in. "Remember," Anne breathes, barely audible. "Not a sound, not a movement until they're gone." And so you stand, frozen against the wall, as the elite of Georgian court society fill the room. Their voices wash over you, discussing politics, fashion, who's in favour, who's out. The air fills with the scent of perfume, powder, and unwashed bodies beneath the finery. Even the aristocracy bathes rarely, believing it unhealthy. Then a hush falls, and from your downcast position you see the courtiers bow and curtsy deeply as someone enters the room, the king. George the Fom is shorter than you expected, a stocky man of 60 with a florid face and a prominent nose. His wig is perfectly powdered, his coat richly embroidered with gold thread. He walks with a slight limp, gout according to palace gossip, and is followed closely by Mehmet and Mustafa, the Turkish valets. The king takes his seat on the throne, face impassive as the courtiers rise from their bows. He says something in German to Mehmet, who translates it into English for the assembled crowd. "His Majesty will receive petitions now," Mehmet announces, his accented English carrying across the room. One by one, the courtiers approach the throne, bowing again before presenting their requests to the king. Some seek positions for themselves or family members. Others royal patronage for projects, still others resolution to disputes. George listens impassively to each, occasionally conferring with Mehmet before giving his answer in German, which Mehmet then translates. From your position against the wall, you observe the intricate dance of court politics playing out before you. Every gesture, every word seems calculated. When the king smiles slightly at one petitioner, the courtiers shift almost imperceptibly, recalibrating the man's status in their minds. When he frowns at another, you can almost feel the man's stock plummeting. "Or see how it works?" Anne whispers, so quietly you barely hear her. One smile from the king makes a career, one frown breaks it, and we see it all. As the audience continues, you remain motionless against the wall, your legs beginning to cramp from standing so still. But you dare not move. Servants who draw attention to themselves rarely last long at court. Finally, after what seems like hours, the king rises. Instantly, everyone bows again as George leaves the room, followed by his entourage. Only when the last courtier has departed does Anne finally step away from the wall, rolling her shoulders to ease the stiffness. "Not bad," she says, looking you over. "You didn't faint, Fidget, or make a sound. Might make a proper palace servant of you yet." As you help Anne clear the room, gathering discarded gloves, handkerchiefs, and even a forgotten snuff box, she continues your education in palace life. "The real power isn't always where you think," she says, checking under a chair for any missed items. "Take the king's mistress, Melusine. She has the king's ear more than any minister, and the housekeepers and valets, they know every secret, hear every whisper. Information is valuable currency at court." She straightens up, a slight smile on her face. "That's why it's not so bad being invisible. People forget we're there. They say things, do things they wouldn't if they remembered the servants have eyes and ears. You think about everything you've seen and heard already in just your first few hours at Kensington Palace. The political manoeuvring, the secrets, the rigid hierarchy that governs every interaction. It's a far cry from the simple farm life you left behind, but there's an undeniable excitement to being at the very centre of power, even if you're just dusting the furniture where that power sits. "Come on," Anne says, heading for the door. "We've got the Cherokee delegation arriving soon, and Mistress Keene wants all the guest chambers prepared. No rest for palace servants, not when there's royal business afoot." As you follow her back into the labyrinth of Kensington Palace, you realise you've barely scratched the surface of life in this complex, fascinating, exhausting world. The bells may rule your days, the work may break your back, but you're now part of the great machinery that keeps the Georgian court running. Invisible, perhaps, but indispensable, and tomorrow you'll do it all again. The day stretches ahead like an endless corridor of tasks. Your back already aches from hauling water and coal, but you've barely begun your first day at Kensington Palace. "Finished daydreaming?" Anne asks, catching you staring out a window at the gardens. "Come on, Mistress Keene wants us in the laundry rooms next." You follow her down another narrow staircase, descending deeper into the palace's underbelly. The temperature rises noticeably as you reach the bottom, a stark contrast to the cold corridors above. "Prepare yourself," Anne warns as she pushes open a heavy wooden door. "It's like the mouth of hell in here." She wasn't exaggerating. The laundry room hits you with a wall of steam and heat so intense you instinctively step back. 6 women work in the cramped space, their faces flushed red, hair plastered to their foreheads with sweat despite the January cold outside. Enormous copper tubs bubble with boiling water over roaring fires, filling the air with steam and the sharp scent of lye soap and starch. "This is where all the royal linen gets washed," Anne explains, raising her voice over the clatter of wooden paddles and the splash of water. "Sheets, napkins, tablecloths, all the family's personal linens, over 300 items a day." One of the women looks up from her work, arms elbow deep in scalding water. "You the new girl?" she calls. You nod. "Thank God. We need more hands. Royal napkins don't scrub themselves." "Not today," Anne says quickly. "Mistress Keene wants her in the Queen's drawing room for now, but she'll be down soon enough, I'm sure." "Lucky you," the woman says with a weary smile. "Enjoy the reprieve while it lasts." As you leave the sweltering laundry, Anne explains, laundry women are actually quite well paid compared to other servants. They get a salary plus an allowance for the things they need, alum, starch, clothes chests, but it's brutal work. Most who start there don't last a month. "Where are we going next?" you ask, grateful for the relative cool of the corridor after the laundry room's inferno. "Kitchens. Mistress Keene wants to introduce you to the cook. You might get pulled in to help there if they're short-handed." The palace kitchens make the laundry seem calm by comparison. Enormous fireplaces line one wall, each with various pots, cauldrons, and spits attended by sweating men and boys. Counters overflow with ingredients, vegetables being chopped, meat being trimmed, pastry being rolled. The noise is overwhelming. Shouting, chopping, the sizzle and crack of fires, the clatter of pots and pans. Standing in the centre of this controlled chaos is a tall, imposing man barking orders like a general on a battlefield. This, Anne whispers, is William Daniel, Master Cook to King George II and Queen Caroline. No, 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 Daniel bellows at a terrified-looking boy of about 12. The force meat goes inside the bird, not alongside it. Do I need to show you again, or shall I just send you back to whatever pigsty spawned you? The boy mumbles an apology and quickly corrects his mistake. Daniel spots you and Anne hovering near the doorway and stalks over, wiping his hands on his apron. "This the new one?" he asks Anne, looking you up and down with a critical eye. "Yes, Mr. Daniel. Mistress Keene thought she should meet the kitchen staff." Daniel sniffs. Scrawny little thing, isn't she? Still, might be useful for fetching and carrying. He turns back to his domain. "I'm preparing tonight's menu. Cherokee delegation arriving soon means we'll be serving some English specialties to impress the savages." You bite your tongue at his casual prejudice as he continues, flipping open a leather-bound notebook and scanning the pages. Let's see, potted turtle, puffins, tongue and udders boiled, all on china hot plates for the royal table, and macaron with cheese for the German palates. He glances at you. "You know anything about cooking, girl?" "Some, sir," you answer. "Basic country cooking, nothing like this." He snorts. "Course not. Still, you've got all your fingers, which is more than some of the fools they send me. If they need extra hands in here, at least try not to cut yourself. Blood ruins a good sauce." A sweaty, harried-looking woman approaches Daniel, wiping her hands on her apron. "The puffins have arrived, sir, but they're not as fresh as they should be." Daniel swears colourfully. "When are they ever?" "Fine, we'll have to mask it with spices. Where's that damned nutmeg I asked for?" As Daniel storms off to deal with the puffin crisis, Anne tugs your sleeve. "Come on, we should go. He'll forget all about us in 5 minutes, but if we're still here when he remembers, he'll put us to work." Back in the corridor, you ask, "Puffins? People eat those?" Anne nods. "The rich eat everything just because they can. Turtle, puffin, peacock. If it's rare or hard to get, they want it on their plate. And what's bristling Hanover? I heard him mention it. Some German dish the king likes. Daniel hates making it, but the king insists. George may be king of England, but his heart's still in Hanover." As you continue your tour of the palace's lower regions, you pass a room where a small, wiry man is sharpening what looks like an enormous saw. "Ice housekeeper," Anne explains at your questioning look. "His job is to collect ice from the ponds and canals around the palace and store it in the ice house for summer use. That saw's for cutting blocks from frozen ponds." The man looks up and gives you a friendly nod. "New girl, eh? Welcome to the madhouse." He holds up the saw. "Getting ready for tomorrow. Ponds finally frozen solid enough to cut." "What's the ice used for?" you ask, curious about this strange occupation. "Ice creams and cold drinks for the family," he answers, "and cooling wine and champagne. Very fashionable now, having cold drinks even in summer. The king loves his champagne chilled." Your tour continues through the warren of rooms and corridors that make up the service areas of Kensington Palace. You meet the rat catcher, a grizzled old man with suspicious scratches on his hands and a cage of ferrets in his room. The mole taker, who spends his days in the gardens catching the creatures that ruin the king's carefully manicured lawns. And even the necessary women, the lowest-ranked female servants whose job is sweeping floors and emptying chamber pots. "Every job has its place in the household," Anne explains as you walk. "It's like a giant machine and we're all just cogs in it. Remove one piece and the whole thing falls apart." "Even the mole taker?" you ask sceptically. "Even him. The king would throw a fit if his gardens were ruined by mole hills, and a royal fit means everyone suffers." As you turn a corner, you nearly collide with a young boy of about 14, dressed in fine but slightly ill-fitting clothes. What's strange is his behavior. He's crawling on all fours, making odd grunting noises, and quickly pulls you aside as an exasperated-looking man in scholarly robes follows the boy. "Peter, Peter, come here at once," the man calls, but the boy just continues crawling, occasionally stopping to sniff at the floor like a dog. "That's Peter, the wild boy," Anne whispers as they pass. "The one I told you about from the painting, found living in the woods in Germany. Doesn't speak, acts like an animal. The king brought him to court as a curiosity. That's Dr. Arbuthnot trying to teach him proper behaviour." "Has he had any success?" Anne shakes her head. "Not really. Can't get him to talk at all. But the court finds him amusing, so he stays." You continue on, passing through a corridor where bells of different sizes line the wall, each connected by wires to different rooms throughout the palace. "This is the heart of the system," Anne explains. "Each bell makes a different sound, so servants know which room is calling without looking at the board. Takes most people months to learn them all." Just then, one of the bells rings sharply. A footman who's been lounging nearby immediately stands at attention, checks the board, and hurries off. "Princess Caroline's dressing room," Anne says. "Poor James. Her lady-in-waiting is a dragon." The morning passes in a whirlwind of introductions and tasks. You help clean silver, dust ornaments, polish furniture, and carry messages between different departments. By midday, your feet are throbbing, and you've lost all sense of direction in the palace's labyrinthine layout. "Don't worry," Anne says as you admit your confusion. "Took me a month to stop getting lost. Just remember, green carpets mean the king's apartments, blue means the princess's, and red is for guests and staterooms." In the servants' hall at midday, you finally get a proper meal, a thick stew made from leftover meat from the royal table, with plenty of bread to dip in it. The hierarchy is still strictly observed, but the atmosphere is more relaxed than breakfast, with servants gossiping and exchanging news. "Heard the Cherokees are bringing wampum belts as gifts," a footman says between mouthfuls. "Whatever those are." "Eagle feathers too," adds a maid, "and they paint their faces for ceremonies. Can you imagine the king's face when he sees that?" "Speaking of faces," another servant chimes in, lowering his voice, "did you see Lady Harrington's new beauty patches trying to hide the smallpox scars, poor thing?" "Better than Lord Fenton's solution," replies the first footman with a smirk. "Slathering himself in white lead paint like a common trollop. He'll be mad as a hatter within the year with all that poison seeping into his skin." The conversation flows around you, a river of palace gossip, complaints about particularly demanding courtiers, and speculation about who's rising or falling in the king's favour. You listen, fascinated by this parallel world that exists alongside the glittering court above. After the meal, Anne leads you to the yeoman's wardrobe, a vast room filled with clothing belonging to the royal family and key courtiers. "This is where we maintain and store their clothes," she explains. "Each item has to be carefully inspected for damage, repaired if necessary, cleaned appropriately, and stored properly. Get it wrong, and it's your head." An older woman is seated by the window, carefully stitching lace onto a magnificent gown of blue silk. She looks up as you enter. "Mrs. Thrale, this is our new housemaid," Anne introduces you. "Mrs. Thrale is dresser to Queen Charlotte." The woman nods in acknowledgement. Another pair of hands always welcome. "Can you sew, girl?" "Yes, ma'am," you reply. "My mother taught me." "Good. We're always mending something around here. Those court mantuas tear easily with all that hooping and whalebone." She holds up the dress she's working on. "This is for Lady Howard. Notice the seashells. That's her family crest motif. Every detail matters in court dress. The wrong embroidery could cause a diplomatic incident." You examine the exquisite gown more closely. The craftsmanship is extraordinary, with tiny pearls sewn among the embroidered shells. The fabric alone must have cost a fortune. "How do they even move in these?" you ask, remembering Lady Howard's mincing steps from earlier. Mrs. Thrale chuckles. They don't much. Court dress isn't for comfort, girl. It's for display, showing your wealth and status. The more uncomfortable and impractical, the better. Means you don't have to do anything useful. As you help Anne sort through a chest of linens, checking each piece for tears or stains, Mrs. Thrale continues working on the gown while sharing her observations on court life. Been here 23 years, she says, needle flashing in the winter light. Seen 3 kings come and go. They all have their quirks. This one hates bathing, thinks it lets in bad humours. Last one was obsessed with his timepieces, had 50 clocks all set to chime at different times, used to drive the servants mad. A bell rings in the distance and Anne looks up. That's the king's gallery. They'll need the fires built up. He's showing the new paintings to some guests. Go on then, Mrs. Thrale says, and mind you don't brush against any of the artwork. That French master last month cost more than you'd earn in 50 lifetimes. You and Anne hurry through the palace, taking the servants' shortcuts to reach the king's gallery quickly. This magnificent space is lined with paintings, portraits, landscapes, and historical scenes, all in gilded frames. Tall windows let in the winter light, illuminating the polished wood floor and richly coloured rugs. Quick, build up the fire before they arrive, Anne instructs, pointing to the massive fireplace at one end of the gallery, and dust the frames, but for God's sake don't touch the paintings themselves. You work quickly, adding logs to the fire and carefully dusting the ornate frames. The gallery is empty for now, but voices from the adjoining room indicate the king and his guests will arrive soon. When they come in, we stand by the wall and don't move, Anne reminds you. Like statues, they don't want to be reminded that keeping this place running takes actual people. Sure enough, just as you finish dusting the last frame, the doors open and a group enters. King George is at the centre, accompanied by several courtiers and a man who must be the artist, an elegant figure with a velvet coat and confident bearing. "Ah, William, come and tell them about your latest work," the king says in heavily accented English, gesturing to a large landscape that's recently been hung. William Kent, for it must be the same artist who painted the king's staircase, moves forward with a slight bow. "Your Majesty, this is a view of Richmond Palace from the river. I've taken some artistic liberties with the light to better capture the majesty of the royal residence." As the group moves slowly through the gallery, discussing each painting, you and Anne stand motionless against the wall, eyes downcast. Just as Anne taught you, you've become invisible, part of the palace itself rather than a person. The king stops by one painting, frowning slightly. "This frame, it is new?" "Yes, Your Majesty," Kent replies. "The original was damaged during transport from Hampton Court." George makes a non-committal sound and moves on, but one of the courtiers lingers, studying the frame with apparent suspicion. He runs a finger along the gilded edge, then turns sharply toward where you and Anne are standing. "You there," he calls, pointing at you. "Did you dust this frame today?" Your heart leaps into your throat. Being addressed directly by a courtier is rarely good news for a servant. Anne gives you the tiniest nod, indicating you should answer. "Yes, my lord," you reply, keeping your eyes down. "There's still dust on the lower corner," he says coldly. "Perhaps you require instruction in the proper way to clean. What is your name?" Before you can answer, a smooth voice cuts in. "My Lord Carteret, I believe the issue may be the light. See how it catches the gilding from this angle? An illusion only." It's Kent, the artist, casually stepping between you and the irate courtier. He makes a show of examining the frame closely. "Yes, just as I thought. The new gilding reflects differently. No dust at all. In fact, it's exemplary work." He gives you the briefest glance and wink before turning back to Lord Carteret. "Now, I must show you the companion piece to this. It's just here." As Kent deftly leads the courtier away, you release the breath you didn't realise you were holding. Anne gives you a warning look. Stay still, say nothing. When the royal party finally leaves the gallery, Anne immediately pulls you into a small antechamber off the main room. "That was close," she hisses. "Lord Carteret has had 3 servants dismissed this month alone." He likes finding fault. Why did Kent help me, you ask, still shaken by the encounter. Anne shrugs. Artists are odd. They notice us more than the others do, maybe because they spend so much time observing everything. She straightens your cap, which has gone slightly askew, but don't count on being rescued again. Next time, make damn sure there's not a speck of dust left anywhere. The afternoon brings more tasks, laying fresh linen in the guest chambers, helping to inventory the royal silver, a task that requires 2 witnesses at all times to prevent theft, and learning how to properly fold the heavy velvet curtains in the state rooms to allow exactly the right amount of light without exposing the precious furnishings to damaging sun. By the time the servant's supper is served at 6, you're exhausted, your muscles aching from the unaccustomed work. But there's no rest yet. The court will be dining at 8, and all hands are needed to prepare. The great dining room is a hive of activity as footmen set the enormous table with gleaming silver and crystal, each place setting measured precisely with rulers to ensure perfect alignment. Candles by the 100 are being lit in the chandeliers and wall sconces, filling the room with warm light and the faint scent of beeswax. 3 courses tonight, Anne explains as you help lay out napkins folded into elaborate shapes. First course is the heavy dishes, roasts, pies, soups. Then the remove, where some dishes are taken away and others brought in. Second course is lighter, fowl, vegetables, perhaps some fish. Then everything is cleared for dessert. How many dishes in total, you ask, watching servants carry in silver platters and tureens? For a diplomatic dinner like tonight, probably 70 different dishes per course, Anne replies casually, as if this isn't an astounding number. All laid out on the table at once, French style. The guests serve themselves from whatever's in reach, which is why the placement of dishes is so important. Daniel, the master cook, enters to inspect the table, his critical eye missing nothing. No, the potted turtle goes nearer His Majesty, and the puffins should be across from Lady Howard. She's partial to them. He makes several more adjustments, fussing over the arrangement until it meets his exacting standards. Remember, he instructs the footman, dishes must be placed on the table with absolute silence. No clattering, no scraping. The conversation should not be interrupted by the arrival of food. As the hour approaches for dinner, you and Anne are stationed in a small room adjoining the dining room, ready to fetch anything needed during the meal. Through the partially open door, you can see the magnificent table with its gleaming silver, crystal and china, the light from hundreds of candles making the room glow like a jewel box. Will we see the Cherokee chief? You whisper to Anne. She shakes her head. Not yet. He arrives tomorrow. Tonight is just for the court and diplomatic corps, getting all the protocol straight before the savages arrive. She makes a face at the word. As if half the nobles aren't savages themselves, the way they behave. The meal begins with the arrival of the courtiers, resplendent in their finest clothes. The ladies' mantuas are even more elaborate than what you saw earlier, making the women appear almost like exotic birds with their wide skirts and towering hair. The gentlemen are no less magnificent in their embroidered coats, silk stockings and powdered wigs. King George enters last, and everyone rises until he takes his seat at the head of the table. Only then does the actual eating begin, with footmen moving silently around the table, serving wine and offering dishes that are out of reach. From your position, you can observe the intricate dance of court dining, the delicate way the ladies eat despite their restrictive clothing, the careful conversation that avoids controversial topics, the subtle competition as courtiers try to catch the king's eye or ear. See how Lady Harrington keeps trying to draw the king's attention, Anne whispers. Her husband wants the ambassadorship to Venice, and look at Lord Fenton, filling the French ambassador's glass every chance he gets, hoping for support in some trade agreement, I'd wager. As the meal progresses, you notice something odd. Despite the abundance of food, many of the courtiers eat very little, merely picking at the dishes before them. They've already eaten, Anne explains when you mention this. Most of the court dines privately earlier. This formal dinner is for show, for politics. The food is almost beside the point. Then why prepare 70 dishes, you ask, bewildered by the waste? because the number of dishes shows the king's wealth and power, and don't worry, nothing goes to waste. The upper servants get the leftovers from the royal table, then the lower servants and anything still remaining goes to the poor at the palace gates. As if to illustrate her point, a quiet commotion breaks out when a footman accidentally drops a spoon. The small sound seems magnified in the carefully maintained atmosphere of the dining room. The king glances over sharply, and the footman goes pale. James is done for, Anne murmurs. Breaking the silence of service is a dismissible offence. Sure enough, the butler makes a small gesture and James is immediately replaced by another footman who steps in so smoothly that the service continues without interruption. James slips out a side door, his face a mask of despair. He'll be told to pack his things tonight, Anne says. No reference either, most likely. He'll be lucky to find work as a tavern potboy after this. The brutal efficiency of the system strikes you anew. One small mistake and a career is over. The margin for error in royal service is non-existent. After the meal concludes and the court withdraws to the drawing rooms for music and cards, the real work begins. The dining room must be completely cleaned, every piece of silver polished and stored, the linen laundered, the leftover food properly distributed according to the strict hierarchy. You help clear plates, careful not to chip or scratch anything. The value of a single place setting exceeds your yearly wages many times over. Tomorrow will be even busier, Anne tells you as you work. The Cherokee delegation arrives at noon. Everyone needs to be ready by 10. The king wants to impress them with our English civilization. She rolls her eyes, as if they don't have their own. Later, as you finally climb the servants' stairs to your attic room, legs trembling with exhaustion, you reflect on your first day at Kensington Palace. You've seen more luxury, met more strange characters, and learned more about the hidden machinery of power than in your entire life before. In the tiny room, the other maids are already getting ready for bed. Most are too tired for conversation, stripping off their uniforms and collapsing onto their pallets. Tomorrow will begin at 5 again, another day of invisible service to the visible splendour of the Georgian court. "Well," Anne asks as you sink onto your hard mattress, "still think palace life is all glamour?" You shake your head, too exhausted to speak. The candlelight catches a patch of silver polish on your hand that you missed when washing, a small gleaming reminder of your place in the grand scheme of Kensington Palace. Get some sleep, Anne advises, blowing out the candle. Tomorrow, we meet the Cherokees, and tomorrow, you really learn what it means to be a royal servant. The bells wake you before dawn again, though your body protests with every movement. Yesterday's labour has left muscles aching that you didn't even know you had. Your back throbs from carrying water, your arms burn from scrubbing floors, and your feet feel like they've been pounded with hammers. Up you get, Anne says, already dressing in the dim light. Big day today, Cherokees arriving. You groan softly as you force yourself to sit up, straw rustling beneath you. Sore? Anne asks with a knowing smile. First week's always the worst. After that, your body either gets used to it or gives out entirely. Does anyone ever get used to this? You ask, wincing as you pull on your stockings. Course, Mrs. Thrale's been doing it 23 years, hasn't she? Though she says her knees are pretty much done for. You think of the dresser's careful movements yesterday, the way she shifted in her seat occasionally, as if to ease some persistent pain. The trick, Anne continues, fastening her apron, is to save your strength where you can. Don't rush upstairs when no one's watching. Sit whenever possible, and for God's sake, never volunteer for anything. You follow her advice as best you can as the morning routine begins. Fires to light, water to carry, chamber pots to empty. But today, there's an added urgency to everything, a tension that runs through the entire palace like a plucked string. They've been preparing for this Cherokee visit for months, Anne explains as you hurry through the corridors. King wants to impress them, show how powerful England is, so they'll stay allies against the French in the colonies. Politics. She says the word with the same tone someone might use for a bad smell. When you reach the servants' hall for breakfast, the room is buzzing with activity and gossip. Heard they're bringing scalps as gifts, a footman says, eyes wide. Don't be stupid, a lady's maid retorts. It's wampum belts and tobacco. What about the face paint? Another servant asks. Jenkins says they paint themselves like devils for war. This isn't war, is it? A nervous-looking young maid asks. Depends who you ask, Anne mutters beside you. The French might call it war. Mr. Hamilton claps his hands sharply, silencing the chatter. Enough speculation. The Cherokee delegation will arrive at noon. They are to be treated with the same respect as any foreign dignitaries. Any servant caught gawking, whispering, or behaving inappropriately will be dismissed without character. Is that understood? A chorus of "Yes, Mr. Hamilton" follows. Good. Now, each of you has your assigned duties. The king expects perfection today, and so do I. As you eat your porridge, you notice a woman you haven't seen before entering the hall. She's well dressed, not in servant's clothes, but not in court finery either. Something in between. She's plump, healthy looking, with a calm, dignified bearing. Who's that? You whisper to Anne. Catherine Elliot, Anne replies quietly. Used to be wet nurse to Prince James. Now she has some official position at court, companion or something. Still treated with respect because she literally fed the royal blood with her own body. You study the woman with new interest. So she used to breastfeed the prince, not the queen? Anne snorts. Royal ladies don't feed their own babies. Too high and mighty for that. They find healthy women who've just had babies themselves to do it. But she's still here even though the prince must be grown now. Once you've literally nursed a royal at your breast, you've got a connection they can't ignore. They take care of their wet nurses. Good position if you can get it. Well paid, respected, set for life. After breakfast, you're assigned to help prepare the cupola room where the initial meeting with the Cherokee delegation will take place. It's one of the most magnificent rooms you've seen yet. Octagonal, with a domed ceiling painted with an elaborate celestial scene, marble columns, and gilded statues in niches. Designed by William Kent for the king, Anne explains as you polish a marble tabletop. This is where they receive the most important visitors. As you work, a woman enters carrying an armful of fresh linens. She's clearly a servant, but carries herself with unusual confidence. That's Mrs. Silker, Anne whispers. She's dresser to Queen Charlotte, been here forever. Mrs. Silker nods to you both as she lays out the linens on a side table. New girl? She asks, looking you over. Yes, ma'am, you reply. Just started yesterday. Well, you'll want to get those corners properly polished. The king notices everything. She adjusts the linens with practiced efficiency. Anne, Mistress Keene wants you to help with the Queen's drawing room. I'll finish showing the new girl around. Anne leaves, and you continue polishing under Mrs. Silker's watchful eye. Unlike some of the other senior servants, she doesn't bark orders or criticise constantly. Instead, she occasionally offers quiet guidance. Small circles work better on marble, or a bit more oil there. As you work, she tells you more about her role. Been dresser to the Queen for 12 years now. Before that, I served her mother. Know exactly how she likes her clothes arranged, which order to hand the pieces to her, which perfumes she prefers on which days. Is it difficult, being so close to the royals? You ask. Mrs. Silker considers this. Yes and no. They're people when it comes down to it. Have their moods, their preferences. The trick is learning them, anticipating them. Make yourself useful but not noticeable. She straightens a tassel on a cushion. The Queen reads the newspaper while she's being dressed. Sometimes reads bits aloud to me. Not that she's asking my opinion, mind you. Just thinking aloud. This glimpse into the private moments of royal life fascinates you. So she talks to you? Like a normal person? Not exactly like normal, Mrs. Silker says with a small smile. But yes, she talks. They all do. When you're helping someone dress, doing their hair, there's an intimacy to it. They forget sometimes the difference in our stations. She glances around the room, ensuring everything is perfect. That's one thing you learn quickly in palace service. The royals and nobles see us when it suits them and forget us when it doesn't. You'll be invisible most days, but there'll be moments when suddenly you're very visible indeed. Those moments can make or break you. A bell rings in the distance, not the sharp summons of a service bell, but the deeper tone of the palace clock. 11, Mrs. Silker says. They'll be arriving in an hour. We should finish up here and make ourselves scarce. You complete the preparations, making sure every surface gleams, every object is perfectly placed. As you're about to leave, Mrs. Silker pauses. If you get a chance, she says quietly, try to glimpse the Cherokee chief. I saw him when he arrived in London last week. Fascinating man, not at all the savage the courtiers are expecting. Before you can ask more, she's gone, slipping silently through a servant's door. You return to the servants' hall where Mistress Keene is assigning last-minute duties. You, she says, pointing at you, you'll assist with the refreshments in the presence chamber after the initial reception. Don't speak, don't stare, just serve and withdraw. Understood? Yes, ma'am, you reply, heart racing at the prospect of witnessing the historic meeting firsthand. The next hour passes in a flurry of activity, polishing silver trays, arranging delicate porcelain cups, ensuring the special herbal tea the king prefers is properly brewed. Finally, a footman rushes into the servants' area. They're coming up the drive, he announces. Carriages and horses, quite a procession. Immediately, servants hurry to their positions. You follow a senior maid named Elizabeth carrying a tray of small cakes that the cook has prepared specially. Remember, Elizabeth whispers as you approach the presence chamber. Eyes down, move silently. If anyone speaks to you directly, which they shouldn't, answer only, "Yes, my lord," or "Yes, my lady," and nothing more. You enter the presence chamber through a side door, taking your place against the wall with the other servants. The room is already filled with courtiers in their finest clothes, murmuring excitedly among themselves. The king is not yet present, but his chair of state stands ready on a dais at the far end of the room. The atmosphere is charged with anticipation. You've heard so many stories about the savages from America that you're both nervous and curious to see these visitors for yourself. A hush falls over the assembly as the doors open and the master of ceremonies enters, striking his staff on the floor 3 times. His Majesty, King George II. Everyone bows or curtsies deeply as the king enters, resplendent in a coat of blue velvet embroidered with silver thread. He takes his seat, and only then do the courtiers straighten. Another announcement follows. Tomochichi, Miko of the Yamacraw Creek, and his delegation. The doors open again, and a group of men enter. At their head is a tall, dignified figure who must be Tomochichi himself. He's older than you expected, perhaps in his 70s, with a face lined by sun and experience. As the rumours suggested, his face is indeed painted. Not in garish war paint as the servants gossiped, but with subtle patterns in red and black ochre that highlight his strong features. He wears a mixture of native dress and European-style clothing, buckskin leggings and moccasins, but also a shirt of fine linen and a cloak trimmed with fur. Around his neck hang several necklaces of shells and beads that click softly as he walks. Behind him come several younger men similarly dressed and a boy of about 13 who stays close to the chief's side. The delegation approaches the king and stops at a respectful distance. There's a moment of silence as the two leaders regard each other, the German-born King of England and the Creek chief from lands across the ocean. Then, to the visible surprise of many courtiers, Tomochichi bows. Not in the European style, but with a dignified inclination of his head. He speaks in his own language, his voice deep and measured. A translator steps forward, a weathered Englishman in colonial dress who's clearly spent time among the Creek people. The great Miko Tomochichi greets the great chief of the English people. He brings gifts and friendship from across the great water. One of the younger men steps forward carrying a bundle wrapped in soft hide. He unwraps it to reveal several eagle feathers mounted on decorated sticks. The translator explains, "These sacred eagle feathers have been carried to many Creek towns, signifying peace between our peoples. The Miko presents them to the English chief as a token of continued friendship." King George nods, and Mehmet, his Turkish valet, steps forward to accept the gifts with a bow. The ceremony continues with formal speeches from both sides, translated back and forth. You stand motionless against the wall, but you can't help stealing glances at this fascinating scene. Two vastly different worlds meeting in this ornate chamber. What strikes you most is the dignity of the Creek delegation. Despite the whispers and stares from the courtiers, they maintain a composed, almost regal bearing. Tomochichi speaks with the confidence of a leader, meeting the king's gaze directly, something even many English nobles hesitate to do. After the formal exchange of gifts and greetings, the king rises, signalling the end of the public audience. "We shall continue our discussions privately," he announces. "Refreshments will be served." This is your cue. Following Elizabeth's lead, you step forward with your tray of cakes, offering them first to the king, then to Tomochichi and his delegation. The chief studies the unfamiliar sweets for a moment before selecting one. He takes a bite, considers the taste, then nods appreciatively. As you serve the young Creek boy, he looks directly at you with curious eyes. For a brief moment, your gazes meet, and he gives you a small smile, a simple human connection across the vast gulf of language and culture that separates you. You quickly look down again, remembering your place, but the moment stays with you. The king and the Cherokee delegation withdraw to a smaller chamber for private talks, and the courtiers disperse, buzzing with excited conversation about the noble savages and their exotic appearance. As you return to the servants' area with your empty tray, Anne finds you. "Well, did you see them? What were they like?" "Not at all what I expected," you admit. "The chief, he carried himself like a king himself, and they weren't wild or strange, just different." "Told you," Anne says with satisfaction. "Court gossip's usually wrong about everything. Now come on, they'll be dining in the king's private apartments tonight, and we need to help prepare." The rest of the day passes in a whirlwind of activity. The private dinner for the king and his guests requires just as much preparation as a full court banquet, even with fewer diners. Every detail must be perfect. The king is particularly concerned about impressing his visitors with English sophistication. In the kitchen, William Daniel is creating special dishes that showcase the best of English cuisine, while avoiding anything too strange or exotic that might confuse the Cherokee guests. "Or roast beef," he declares, consulting his leather-bound notebook. "The finest in Europe. They must try English roast beef and Yorkshire pudding, but not too much spice. Their palates won't be used to it." You help carry plates and linens to the king's private dining room, arranging everything according to the precise instructions of the butler. The table is smaller than the great banquet table, but no less magnificent, with gleaming silver, crystal, and the finest porcelain. "The king will sit here," the butler instructs, indicating the head of the table. Chief Tomochichi to his right, that's the position of honor. The translator next to the chief, then the Cherokee boy. The other delegates and English officials alternate down the table. Perfect balance, perfect symmetry. As the dinner hour approaches, you're stationed in a small antechamber with two other servants, ready to fetch anything needed during the meal. Through the partially open door, you can hear the conversation as the king and his guests are seated. "Ask the chief if he has tried wine before," the king says to the translator. There's a brief exchange in the Cherokee language. Then the translator replies, "He says he has tasted the French wine, Your Majesty, but finds it too sour for his liking." The king laughs. Then he must try proper English port, much sweeter, much better. To your surprise, the dinner proceeds with remarkable ease. Despite the language barrier, the king and Tomochichi seem to develop a rapport, communicating through gestures and expressions when the translator struggles with certain concepts. The Cherokee delegates approach the unfamiliar foods with open curiosity, trying everything offered to them. They seem particularly impressed by the roast beef, though they politely decline a dish of potted eels. At one point, the young Creek boy asks a question that causes the translator to hesitate. "What does he wish to know?" the king asks. He asks why there are so many people in the walls, Your Majesty. There's a moment of confusion before the king realizes the boy is referring to the servants stationed around the room, standing motionless against the walls. "Ah," the king says with a laugh. "Tell him these are my people who help with the meal. They are part of the palace." When the translator relays this, the boy looks unconvinced, studying you and the other servants with curious eyes. He says something else to the translator. He says in their council houses, everyone who is present takes part in the meal and the talk. No one stands silent in the walls. For a moment, the king seems taken aback by this different perspective on what he takes for granted. "Interesting," he says finally. "Different customs, different ways. Tell him this is our English tradition." The meal continues, but you find yourself pondering the boy's observation. To him, the elaborate hierarchy of palace service, the system you're learning to navigate, appears strange and incomprehensible. For the first time, you see your role through outside eyes, and it gives you pause. After the dinner concludes, the real work begins for the servants, clearing the table, washing the precious dishes, polishing the silver, and preparing the rooms for the following day. It's well past midnight by the time you're finally released to go to bed. As you climb the narrow servant stairs, weary to your bones, you encounter a familiar face coming down. Mehmet, the king's Turkish valet, looking just as tired as you feel. He nods to you in acknowledgement, unusual for such a high-ranking servant to even notice a housemaid. "Long day," he says in accented English. "Yes, sir," you reply, surprised at being addressed. He pauses, studying you. "You are new here?" "Yes, sir, started yesterday." He nods thoughtfully. The king was pleased with today's events. The Cherokee chief impressed him. A slight smile crosses his face. Not what the English courtiers expected from a savage, I think. You hesitate, uncertain if you should respond to this observation. Mehmet seems to read your caution. "It is not so different, you know. I was brought here as a curiosity too once, a Turkish prisoner. Now I examine the king's piles and keep his private purse." He shrugs. "Courts are the same everywhere, always looking for the exotic to display." With that cryptic observation, he continues down the stairs, leaving you to ponder his words as you climb to your attic room. Anne is still awake when you arrive, sitting on her pallet mending a tear in her apron. "There you are," she says. "Thought you'd never make it up. How was it, serving the king's private dinner?" You sink onto your own hard mattress, too tired to even remove your shoes. "Strange. Interesting. The Cherokee weren't anything like people said." "Never are," Anne replies with a yawn. "Half of what gets whispered around here is nonsense. Remember that." "I met Mehmet on the stairs just now," you tell her. "The king's Turkish valet. He actually spoke to me." Anne looks up sharply. "What did he say?" You relate the brief conversation, and Anne frowns. "Odd. He doesn't usually bother with new housemaids. Keep your distance there. He's got the king's ear, and that makes him dangerous." "He didn't seem dangerous," you protest. "Just thoughtful." "That's how the dangerous ones are," Anne says, returning to her mending. "The thoughtful ones, they notice things, remember things. In a place where most people look right through servants, the ones who actually see you are the ones to watch out for." You consider this as you finally remove your shoes and begin undressing for bed. In just 2 days, you've entered a world more complex than you ever imagined. A world of rigid hierarchy and unspoken rules, of politics and power, where even a conversation on a staircase might have hidden meanings. "Tomorrow's another big day," Anne says, blowing out the candle. "The king's taking the Cherokees hunting at Richmond. Half the household is going along, which means twice the work for those of us left behind. Better get some sleep." In the darkness, you stare up at the ceiling, mind still swirling with images from the day. Tomochichi's dignified bearing, the curious gaze of the Cherokee boy, Mehmet's knowing smile, worlds colliding in the ornate rooms of Kensington Palace, with you, a simple housemaid, witness to it all. Somewhere in the palace, a clock strikes 2. In just 3 hours, the bells will ring again, calling you to another day of service, but for now you sink into exhausted sleep, dreaming of eagle feathers and painted faces. Turkish prisoners become royal favourites and silent servants standing in the walls. The days blend together in a haze of endless tasks, sore muscles and stolen moments of rest. A week has passed since the Cherokee delegation's arrival, and your body is finally adapting to the relentless pace of palace life. Your hands have hardened, your legs have strengthened, and you've learned to catch quick naps standing up against walls, a skill Anne assures you is essential to palace survival. Morning, Anne mumbles as you both dress in the grey light before dawn. King's got a drawing room tonight, gonna be a late one. You've learned that a drawing room is a formal evening reception where the king and royal family receive courtiers and distinguished visitors. For the family and guests, it's an evening of conversation, music, and political manoeuvring. For the servants, it's hours of extra work. Will the Cherokees be there, you ask, splashing cold water on your face from the basin you share with 4 other maids? Nah, they left for Bristol yesterday. King's already moved on to the next thing. She yawns. Now it's all about the Spanish ambassador's wife having a baby. Apparently, that's a matter of state importance. You've quickly discovered that palace life is a constant cycle of visitors, events, and ceremonies, each requiring perfect execution before being immediately forgotten in preparation for the next. Today's main task is preparing the Queen's drawing room for tonight's reception. As you and Anne head downstairs, the palace is already alive with activity despite the early hour. Fires are being lit, water is being hauled, and the first deliveries of the day, fresh bread, milk, flowers, are arriving at the service entrance. In the servants' hall, Mistress Keene is holding court, assigning duties with military precision. Anne, you and the new girl will assist Mrs. Thrale with the maids of honour. Their court dresses need preparation for tonight. Steam pressing, repairs, whatever's needed, report to the yeoman's wardrobe immediately after breakfast. Your heart sinks a little. The elaborate court mantuas worn by the maids of honour are notoriously difficult to prepare and maintain, but at least you'll be working with Mrs. Thrale, who's been kind to you so far. After a quick breakfast of porridge and ale, you and Anne make your way to the yeoman's wardrobe. This enormous room contains thousands of garments belonging to the royal family and court, everything from everyday clothes to the most elaborate ceremonial wear. Mrs. Thrale is already there, examining a magnificent mantua in pale blue silk, frowning at some invisible flaw in the fabric. "Ah, good, you're here," she says without looking up. "We've got 6 court dresses to prepare by 4 o'clock. The maids of honour will need to begin dressing by then to be ready for the drawing room at 8. 4 hours to dress?" you ask in disbelief. Mrs. Thrale gives you a patient look. "Have you seen these gowns? The hoops alone take 20 minutes to position correctly. Then there's the stomacher, the petticoats, the overskirt, the train, not to mention the hair, which is an entire separate department." The mantuas are laid out across several tables, enormous confections of silk, brocade and lace, each at least 6 feet wide with elaborate trains. You've never seen such extravagant garments up close. The pale blue one Mrs. Thrale is examining has silver thread embroidery, depicting flowers and birds so detailed they almost seem alive. "This one belongs to Lady Howard," Mrs. Thrale explains. "Notice the seashell motif. That's her family crest. The embroidery is coming loose here." She points to a barely perceptible flaw in the silver stitching. "We need to repair it before tonight." For the next several hours, you assist Mrs. Thrale and Anne in preparing the court dresses. Your task is relatively simple, carefully steaming the delicate fabrics to remove wrinkles while Anne handles basic repairs and Mrs. Thrale tackles the more complex embroidery issues. These dresses cost more than a servant makes in 10 years, Mrs. Thrale tells you as you work. The silk alone is imported from China, the silver thread from Italy, the lace from Belgium, and they're worn maybe 4 or 5 times before the lady wants something new. Seems wasteful, you venture cautiously. Of course it is, Mrs. Thrale says with a shrug. But waste is the point. Only the very wealthy can afford to be wasteful. That's how they show their status. As midday approaches, the door to the wardrobe opens and a young woman enters, perhaps 18, with fair hair and a haughty expression. She's wearing a simple day dress, but her bearing marks her as a member of the court rather than a servant. Lady Howard, Mrs. Thrale says with a curtsy. We weren't expecting you until this afternoon. Lady Howard waves a dismissive hand. I wanted to check on my gown. The embroidery needed repair, yes? Just finishing it now, my lady. Mrs. Thrale gestures to the mantua. Would you like to examine it? Lady Howard approaches, studying the dress with a critical eye. The shell pattern looks uneven here, she says, pointing to a section that looks perfectly fine to you. I've reinforced the stitching, my lady, but I can add more detail if you wish. Lady Howard sighs dramatically. I suppose it will have to do. I hear Lady Carlton has a new mantua from Paris with actual pearls sewn into the fabric. Pearls. How am I to compete with that? Your gown is the height of fashion, my lady, Mrs. Thrale says smoothly. The seashell design is unique. Lady Carlton has nothing so distinctive. This seems to please Lady Howard, whose expression softens slightly. Well, at least I won't look like every other lady at court. She glances at you and Anne, noticing you for the first time. New maids? This one is, Mrs. Thrale says, nodding at you. Just started last week. Lady Howard studies you briefly. She has good hands for fine work. See that she helps with my dresses in the future. With that pronouncement, she sweeps out of the room, leaving a faint trail of rose perfume behind her. That's a good sign, Mrs. Thrale tells you once Lady Howard is gone. She's demanding, but not cruel. Some of the ladies throw things at the servants when they're displeased. Throw things, you repeat, shocked. Oh yes, Lady Pembroke once hit a footman with a silver hairbrush because he brought her chocolate too cold, split his forehead open. Nothing happened to her, of course, but the footman was dismissed for bleeding on the carpet. You're still processing this casual cruelty when the door opens again. This time, it's a different sort of visitor. The Turkish valet, Mehmet, whom you met briefly on the stairs after the Cherokee dinner. Mrs. Thrale, he says with a slight bow. The king requests the blue velvet coat with silver buttons for tonight's drawing room, the one from last summer. Of course, Mr. von Königstreu, Mrs. Thrale replies, using his formal German title. I'll have it pressed and sent up immediately. Mehmet's gaze falls on you, and a flicker of recognition crosses his face. The new housemaid. You're still here then. Many don't last the first week. Yes, sir, you reply, unsure how to respond to his direct address. Good. Perhaps you're stronger than you look. With that cryptic comment, he nods to Mrs. Thrale and leaves. That's twice he's noticed you, Anne whispers when he's gone. Very odd. Is that bad? You ask, remembering her warning about keeping your distance from the king's favourite. Not necessarily bad, just unusual. Mehmet doesn't typically concern himself with new housemaids. He moves in higher circles. She gives you a curious look. Maybe he sees something in you. Mrs. Thrale interrupts this speculation. Less gossip, more work. These gowns won't prepare themselves, and we still have the king's blue velvet to press now. By late afternoon, all 6 mantuas are ready, hanging like magnificent sculptures on special frames that maintain their elaborate shape. You're exhausted from the detailed work, your fingers sore from manipulating the delicate fabrics, but there's a satisfaction in seeing the gorgeous, finished products. Not bad, Mrs. Thrale says, which you've learned is high praise from her. Now we need to deliver them to the maids of honour's apartments. They'll be waiting to begin dressing. The maids of honour, young noblewomen who serve as companions to the royal women, have their own apartments in a separate wing of the palace. As you help carry the enormous dresses through the corridors, a challenging task given their size and weight, Anne explains more about their role. They're basically ornamental, she says. Pretty, well-born girls who bring music and laughter and light to the court. That's the official line anyway. Really, they're there to attract suitable husbands and keep the court lively. Dance, play music, gossip, flirt. That's their job. Sounds easier than carrying coal, you observe, struggling with the unwieldy blue mantua. Anne smirks. Different kind of hard. They're watched all the time. One wrong step, accepting the wrong man's attention, saying the wrong thing politically, and they're ruined. Beautiful cages, those mantuas. When you reach the maids of honor's apartments, you're greeted by a scene of controlled chaos. Young women in various stages of undress are being attended by their personal maids, with hairstylists, jewellery keepers, and shoe fitters all competing for space. "Finally," exclaims a striking brunette as you enter with Lady Howard's dress. "I was beginning to think I'd have to attend in my nightgown." "Apologies for the delay, Lady Howard," Mrs. Thrale says, directing you to place the mantua on a special stand. "The embroidery required extra attention." "Well, it's here now. Rebecca, help me with my stays." You watch in fascination as Lady Howard is transformed from a petulant young woman in a simple shift to a vision of 18th century court splendour. First come the stays, a rigid corset that cinches her waist to an impossibly small circumference. Then the enormous hooped petticoat that extends her skirts outward on both sides. Next, the elaborate underskirt, followed by the overskirt with its sweeping train. Finally, the stomacher, a stiff decorated panel, is pinned to the front of her bodice, completing the transformation. The process is indeed as time-consuming as Mrs. Thrale predicted. By the time Lady Howard is fully dressed, nearly 2 hours have passed, and that's before her hair is styled, a process that involves padding, pomade, powder, and seemingly endless pinning and arranging. How do they move in these things? You whisper to Anne as Lady Howard practices walking in small, careful steps. "They don't much," Anne replies. "Can't sit properly, can't walk normally, can barely breathe. That's the point. It shows they don't need to do anything useful. Once all the maids of honour are dressed, a rainbow of silk and jewels, Mrs. Thrale dismisses you and Anne. Your work is done here. Report to Mr. Hamilton in the Queen's drawing room. You'll be needed to help serve refreshments during the drawing room." You're surprised at this assignment. Serving at a formal royal event is usually reserved for more experienced staff, but as Anne explains on your way to find Mr. Hamilton, the drawing room requires all hands on deck. Every servant with a clean apron and steady hands gets pulled in on nights like this, she says. Just remember, eyes down, move silently, be invisible unless required. Mr. Hamilton is directing the final preparations in the Queen's drawing room, a magnificent space with silk-covered walls, crystal chandeliers, and gilt furniture. Footmen in the royal livery are arranging chairs and tables, while others are laying out trays of delicate glasses for wine, punch, and ratafia, a sweet liqueur popular with the ladies. "Ah, there you are," Mr. Hamilton says when he spots you. "You'll be stationed by the west wall with the small cakes and sweetmeats. Do not approach the guests. Wait for them to approach you. Offer the tray with your left hand. Keep your right behind your back. No speaking unless directly addressed, and then only 'Yes, my lord lady' or 'No, my lord lady.' Clear?" "Yes, Mr. Hamilton," you reply, intimidated by the responsibility. "Good. The King and Queen will arrive at 8 precisely. Courtiers are already gathering in the antechamber. Take your position now. You find your assigned spot along the west wall, where a small table holds a silver tray of exquisitely decorated little cakes, fruit tartlets, and candied fruits. Anne is stationed nearby with a tray of glasses. "Nervous?" she whispers as the first courtiers begin to enter the room. You nod, watching as the space fills with finely dressed nobles. The men are resplendent in brightly coloured silk coats with elaborate embroidery, their calves displayed in white silk stockings. The women move carefully in their enormous mantuas, their powdered hair towering above jewel-encrusted faces. "Don't be," Anne says. "They barely notice us, just part of the furniture." She's right. As the room fills, none of the courtiers so much as glance at the servants lining the walls. They're too busy greeting each other, jockeying for position, and trying to secure advantageous spots near where the king and queen will sit. At precisely 8 o'clock, a hush falls over the room as the master of ceremonies announces Their Majesties King George and Queen Caroline. Everyone bows or curtsies deeply as the royal couple enters. The king is wearing the blue velvet coat you helped prepare earlier, while Queen Caroline is magnificent in a crimson mantua with gold embroidery. They move to their chairs at the head of the room, and only when they sit do the courtiers rise. The drawing room follows a precise protocol. First, selected courtiers are presented to the king and queen, approaching the royal chairs with deep bows or curtsies, exchanging a few words, then withdrawing. Next come the foreign ambassadors and their wives, each accorded time proportional to their country's importance to Britain. From your position against the wall, you observe the intricate dance of court politics playing out before you. Who speaks to whom, who is snubbed, who receives a smile from the queen or a nod from the king, all are noted and analysed by the watchful courtiers. After the formal presentations, the atmosphere relaxes slightly. Musicians in a small gallery begin playing soft chamber music. Courtiers form conversational groups, though always with one eye on the royals. This is when servants like you are finally approached for refreshments. A gentleman in an elaborately embroidered green coat stops before your table, examining the cakes. He selects a tiny fruit tartlet with a casual gesture, as if you're merely an extension of the table rather than a person. As the evening progresses, you begin to recognise various court figures from gossip you've heard below stairs. There's the Duke of Newcastle, one of the King's chief ministers, deep in conversation with the Spanish ambassador. Lady Pembroke, she of the hairbrush-throwing incident, is holding court among a circle of admirers. The maids of honour flit about like exotic birds, their enormous skirts requiring constant negotiation in the crowded space. Your feet are aching from standing still for so long, but you dare not shift position or lean against the wall. Any break in perfect posture could draw unwanted attention. So you stand, offering your tray when approached, observing the spectacle of Georgian court life from your unique vantage point. Around 10 o'clock, there's a subtle shift in the room's energy. Courtiers begin arranging themselves in a loose circle, and the musicians change to a livelier tune. Dancing, Anne whispers as she passes with a tray of empty glasses. The Queen loves court dances. Sure enough, Queen Caroline rises from her chair, followed by the King. Couples form for a formal minuet, the ladies' enormous skirts creating a particular challenge for the dance's precise movements. Yet they manage with practiced grace, having spent years learning these intricate steps. The maids of honour are in their element now, partnered with eligible gentlemen, their faces animated as they perform the formal patterns of the dance. This, you realise, is what Anne meant about their role, bringing music and laughter and light to court. In their colourful mantuas, moving through the stately figures of the dance, they transform the room from a political arena to a scene of elegant pleasure. As you watch, a small commotion near the door catches your attention. A messenger has entered and is speaking urgently to one of the King's secretaries. The secretary, looking concerned, approaches the King during a break in the dancing and whispers something in his ear. The King's expression changes subtly, a tightening around the eyes, a slight frown. He says something to the Queen, then follows the secretary from the room without announcement. The dancing continues, but there's a ripple of curious glances and whispers among the courtiers. Anne appears at your side, ostensibly adjusting your tray of cakes. "French courier just arrived," she murmurs. "Something's happened. The King's gone to his private study with Lord Harrington and Mehmet." "How do you know?" you whisper back. She gives you a look. Servants talk. James was on door duty and heard the message being delivered. Something about trouble in the colonies. French troops moving where they shouldn't be. This reminder of the larger world beyond the palace walls, of empires and wars and political maneuvering across oceans, gives you a momentary sense of perspective. While court ladies worry about shell embroidery and dance steps, real people are fighting and dying in distant lands over these same royals' territorial claims. The drawing room continues despite the king's absence, with Queen Caroline seamlessly taking charge. More dancing, more refreshments, more carefully calculated social interactions. It's nearly midnight when the Queen finally signals the end of the evening by rising from her chair. The courtiers bow and curtsy once more as she withdraws, then begin to disperse themselves. Only when the last guest has left do the servants relax their rigid postures. Your back and feet are screaming with pain after hours of standing motionless. Around you, footmen and maids begin clearing glasses, rearranging furniture, and extinguishing candles. Not bad for your first drawing room, Anne says as you help gather scattered napkins and abandoned fans. You didn't drop anything, break anything, or get noticed, the servant's trifecta of success. Is it always like this? You ask, rolling your shoulders to ease the stiffness. More or less, bigger for special occasions, smaller when the court is in mourning, but always the same dance, literally and figuratively. As you work, you notice Mrs. Thrale enter the room looking for something. She spots you and approaches. There you are. Mistress Keene sent me to find you. You're wanted in the Queen's apartments. You freeze, heart suddenly racing. Being summoned to the royal apartments, especially at this hour, is unusual and potentially alarming. Did I do something wrong? You ask, trying to recall any mistake you might have made during the evening. Mrs. Thrale shakes her head. No idea. Just following orders. Better hurry. Mistress Keene doesn't like to be kept waiting. You glance at Anne, who looks as confused as you feel. Go on, she says. I'll finish up here. With nervous steps, you follow Mrs. Thrale through the palace corridors, up a private staircase, and into a part of Kensington you've never seen before. The Queen's private apartments. Unlike the grand public rooms, these chambers have a more intimate, comfortable feel, though they're still luxuriously appointed with silk hangings, fine paintings, and elegant furniture. Mistress Keene is waiting in an antechamber, her expression giving nothing away. Good, you're here. Follow me. She leads you to a door and knocks softly. A woman's voice from within calls, "Enter." To your shock, you find yourself in what must be the Queen's personal bedchamber. Queen Caroline herself is seated at a dressing table while a lady-in-waiting removes pins from her elaborate hairstyle. The enormous crimson mantua has been replaced by a silk dressing gown. Is this the girl? The Queen asks, studying your reflection in her mirror. Yes, Your Majesty, Mistress Keene replies with a deep curtsy. You hastily follow suit, heart hammering in your chest. Mehmet mentioned her, the Queen says she has good hands and a discreet manner. She turns to look at you directly. Girl, do you know why you're here? No, Your Majesty, you manage to reply, keeping your eyes respectfully lowered. We need additional help in the royal nursery. The princess's wet nurse requires assistance, and Mehmet suggested you might be suitable. You'll report to Mrs. Elliot tomorrow morning instead of your usual duties. You're stunned by this unexpected development. The royal nursery is one of the most prestigious assignments in the palace, usually reserved for servants with years of experience. Thank you, Your Majesty, you stammer. I'm honoured. The Queen waves a dismissive hand. Don't thank me yet. The children can be more demanding than any courtier. You're dismissed. You curtsy again and back out of the room, mind reeling. In the antechamber, Mistress Keene gives you an appraising look. Well, this is unexpected. You've caught someone's eye, though whether that's good or bad remains to be seen. She adjusts her keys with a businesslike jingle. Report to the nursery at 6 tomorrow morning. Don't be late, and for God's sake wear a clean apron. As you make your way back through the palace to your attic room, you try to process this sudden change in your fortunes. From invisible housemaid to royal nursery attendant in the space of a week, all apparently because Mehmet, the Turkish valet, noticed you and spoke well of you to the Queen. "The royal nursery," Anne exclaims when you tell her the news back in your shared room. That's unheard of for someone so new. The wet nurses and nursemaids are elite servants. "I don't understand why Mehmet would recommend me," you say, still confused. "I've barely spoken to him." Anne sits on her pallet, considering this. It's about palace politics, most likely. Mehmet and Mrs. Elliot, that's the wet nurse, right? They're both outsiders, who've risen to important positions. They stick together, create their own faction. He's probably placing you as an ally. You're not sure how you feel about being a pawn in palace servant politics, but the assignment is undoubtedly a step up from hauling coal and washing floors. "Get some sleep," Anne advises. "The royal children wake at dawn, and trust me, you don't want to keep them or their nurses waiting." As you settle onto your hard mattress, your mind is too full for sleep despite your physical exhaustion. In just 1 week, you've witnessed diplomatic history with the Cherokee delegation, prepared gowns worth fortunes, served at a royal drawing room, and now been personally reassigned by the Queen herself. The world of Kensington Palace is more complex, fascinating, and dangerous than you ever imagined, and tomorrow you'll see yet another side of it, the royal nursery, where future kings and queens take their first steps under the watchful eyes of servants like you. The last thing you hear before drifting off is the palace clock striking 1. 5 hours until you need to report for your new duties. 5 hours to rest before the next chapter in your unlikely journey through the hidden world of palace service begins. Morning comes with a different sound than you're used to. Not the harsh clanging of servant bells, but the gentle babbling of Princess Augusta. Your new chamber, though small, offers the luxury of waking to a baby's coos rather than a housekeeper's shouts. You dress quickly in your plain uniform, still marvelling at having space to yourself after a lifetime of shared rooms. Through the thin wall, you can hear the nursemaids already moving about, preparing for the day. When you enter the night nursery, Mary is lifting a very awake Princess Augusta from her cradle. "There you are," Mary says cheerfully, "just in time. His Royal Highness has created a royal mess in his bed, and Mrs. Elliot wants you to help change the linens while we get the children washed and dressed." Prince George, a sturdy toddler with fair hair and a determined expression, has indeed soaked through his bedding. The task of stripping and remaking a royal bed falls to you. Still menial work, but considerably more pleasant than hauling coal or scrubbing floors in the staterooms. "Bath day," Mary reminds you as she expertly changes Princess Augusta's napkin. And Tuesday means the drawing master comes for Prince George's first art lesson. The royal nursery, you're discovering, runs on a strict weekly schedule. Monday is for music, Tuesday for drawing, Wednesday for basic letters, Thursday for religious instruction, Friday for dance, Saturday for outdoor activities, and Sunday for abbreviated lessons, followed by a formal visit from both king and queen. "Is he old enough for drawing lessons?" you ask, bundling up the soiled linens. Mary laughs. "Of course not. He's barely 2, but the king insists the children's education begin early. The drawing master will basically watch while His Highness scribbles with a crayon, then pronounce his artistic potential remarkable. 5 guineas for 30 minutes work." As you've quickly learned, much of the royal children's schedule is more about appearance than actual education at this young age. The parade of tutors and masters who visit the nursery often do little more than bow to the children and collect their fees. By 7 o'clock, both children are awake and ready for their morning routine. Breakfast is simple but nutritious. Warm milk, soft-boiled eggs and finely ground porridge prepared in the special nursery kitchen. As with everything the royal children consume, each item must be tasted first by a nursemaid. "Why do you do the tasting?" you ask Mary as she samples the prince's porridge before allowing it to be served. Tradition, she replies. Though there was an attempt to poison the old king's grandfather as a child, a nursemaid died. Ever since, tasting has been mandatory. The casual way she mentions this potential danger sends a chill through you. Despite the nursery's peaceful atmosphere, you're reminded that royal children face threats ordinary ones don't. After breakfast comes dressing, an elaborate process even for such young children. No simple cotton gowns for these royal babies. Prince George, despite being only 2, is dressed like a miniature adult in breeches, waistcoat and jacket of fine silk. Princess Augusta wears a scaled-down version of a lady's formal dress, complete with tiny stays, not tightly laced at her age, and petticoats. Seems impractical for children who can barely walk, you observe as you help Mary arrange the princess's skirts. Of course it is, Mary agrees, but they must learn early what's expected of them. By the time they're presented at court properly, wearing these clothes will be second nature. The morning passes in a flurry of routine tasks, supervised play for the children, airing of rooms, preparation for the drawing master's visit. You're mainly assigned to Princess Augusta, helping Mrs. Elliot with her care while the more experienced nursemaids handle Prince George. Shortly before 11, Mrs. Powys enters the day nursery looking uncharacteristically flustered. "The Turkish valet is here," she announces. "He wishes to speak with Mrs. Elliot." Mrs. Elliot, who has been showing you how to properly fold the princess's delicate dresses, looks up with interest rather than surprise. Send him in, of course. Mehmet enters with a small bow to Mrs. Elliot. He's dressed as always in his unique blend of Eastern and Western clothing. Today, a well-cut European coat over a Turkish-style waistcoat embroidered with silk thread. "Mrs. Elliot," he greets her. "How are our young royals today?" "Thriving," she replies with a genuine smile. The princess has stopped fussing with her tooth, and the prince has mastered please in both English and German. Mehmet nods approvingly, then notices you. "Ah, the new assistant. Settling in well, I trust?" "Yes, sir," you reply, still uncertain how to interact with this enigmatic figure who seems to have taken an interest in your fate. "Good. You have questions, I think, about why you're here." His perceptiveness is unnerving. Mrs. Elliot hands Princess Augusta to Mary. "Perhaps we should speak privately. Mary, continue showing our new assistant how to properly press the small linens." Before leaving, Mehmet pauses beside you. "You have an observer's eyes," he says quietly. "You see much and say little, a valuable quality in this place." You watch as he and Mrs. Elliot withdraw to her private chamber, wondering what connection exists between the king's Turkish valet and the royal wet nurse that gives them both such confidence and influence. "Don't worry about it," Mary advises, seeing your confused expression. "Palace alliances are complicated. Mehmet and Mrs. Elliot understand something most servants don't, that real power isn't just about rank, it's about proximity and information." "What do you mean?" you ask, carefully pressing a tiny handkerchief embroidered with the royal cipher. Mary lowers her voice, though the only others present are the children. "Think about it. Who knows the king's most personal secrets? Not Lord Harrington or the Duke of Newcastle for all their grand titles. It's Mehmet who helps him dress, tends to his ailments, and hears his unguarded thoughts." She nods toward the princess, happily gumming a silver rattle. "And who shapes the earliest experiences of future monarchs? Not their distant parents, but people like Mrs. Elliot and us. These children will grow up remembering the servants who raised them, not the courtiers who bowed to them." It's a perspective on palace hierarchy you hadn't considered, that the lowly servants who attend the most intimate moments might in some ways have more genuine connection to the royals than the grand nobles who fill the state rooms. Your contemplation is interrupted by the arrival of the drawing master, a flamboyant Frenchman in a purple coat who makes an elaborate show of setting up a small easel, paper and special crayons for the prince's lesson. As Mary predicted, the session consists mainly of Prince George making enthusiastic scribbles while the drawing master exclaims over his extraordinary talent and natural artistic sensibility. The prince, to his credit, seems to enjoy the activity, concentrating with serious focus on his colourful marks. He actually does have a good eye for colour, Mrs. Powys observes as the lesson concludes with effusive praise from the Frenchman. Better than his father, who's colourblind but won't admit it, keeps insisting blue is green to the despair of his tailors. This small insight into the king's private challenges, something rarely revealed to the public, reminds you of your unique position as a nursery servant, privy to royal imperfections normally hidden behind ceremony and protocol. After the drawing master departs, 5 guineas richer, as Mary predicted, it's time for the children's midday meal and nap. You assist with feeding Princess Augusta small spoonfuls of chicken broth and rice pudding, wiping her chin when she dribbles and learning the patient rhythm of coaxing royal food into a royal mouth. You have a gentle touch, Mrs. Elliot observes, watching you. The princess responds well to you. You feel an unexpected surge of pride at this praise. She's an easy baby to care for. Not always, Mrs. Elliot says with a knowing smile. She has her father's temper when crossed. You simply haven't seen it yet. As the children settle for their afternoon nap, Mrs. Elliot beckons you to join her for tea again, becoming something of a daily ritual, you realise. This time, however, Mehmet is also present in her private chamber, making this invitation feel more significant. "And sit," Mrs. Elliot says, pouring you a cup. "Mehmet and I have been discussing your position here." Your stomach tightens with sudden anxiety. Have you done something wrong? Are you being sent back to general housemaid duties? Mehmet, seeming to read your concern, raises a reassuring hand. "You need not worry. We are pleased with your work thus far." "Very pleased," Mrs. Elliot confirms, "which is why we think you're ready to understand more about your role here." They exchange a glance, and Mehmet continues. "The palace is not merely a residence, it is the heart of empire. Decisions made here affect lives from Ireland to India, and those decisions are influenced by more than just ministers and diplomats." Mrs. Elliot nods. Information flows through this palace like blood through a body. Those who control that flow, who know what the king ate for breakfast, which courtier is in debt, which foreign envoy spoke carelessly after too much wine, they have power that lords and ladies can't imagine. "And the nursery," you ask, beginning to grasp their meaning. "Is a unique listening post," Mrs. Elliot confirms. "Royal parents speak more freely here than anywhere else in the palace. Foreign visitors let down their guard around children. Courtiers seeking favour share secrets they'd never reveal elsewhere." Mehmet leans forward slightly. "Mrs. Elliot and I came to an understanding years ago. Neither of us was born to privilege, yet we've both risen to positions of significant influence. We protect each other's interests and those of others like us." "A network," you say, the picture becoming clearer. "Precisely," Mrs. Elliot says with approval. "A network of eyes and ears throughout the palace, from the king's bedchamber to the kitchen, from the royal nursery to the stables. We share what we learn, anticipate threats and opportunities, and ensure our collective security." It sounds almost like espionage, and your discomfort must show on your face. "This isn't about disloyalty to the crown," Mehmet says firmly. "Quite the opposite. We serve the royal family more honestly than most, but we also look after our own interests, as any sensible person must." "What exactly would be expected of me?" you ask cautiously. "For now, simply observe and learn," Mrs. Elliot says. "Note which courtiers visit the nursery and what they say. Pay attention to which foreign diplomats show genuine interest in the children versus those merely going through the motions. Listen for gossip about court alliances and rivalries. And report to you When there's something worth reporting, Mehmet confirms, nothing that would harm the royal family, but information that helps us navigate palace politics. In return, we continue to advance your position and protect your interests. It's a proposition both tempting and slightly alarming. The chance to rise above your station through this secret alliance of servants, but also the risk of becoming entangled in palace intrigues beyond your understanding. Think on it, Mrs. Elliot advises, seeing your uncertainty. There's no rush, but remember that in a place like this, neutrality is rarely an option for long. Either you're part of a network of protection or you're vulnerable and alone. With that sobering thought, your unusual tea party concludes. Mehmet takes his leave with a respectful nod to Mrs. Elliot and a thoughtful glance at you. The afternoon brings a visit from an unexpected quarter, a Cherokee delegation member who remained at court when Tomochichi and the others departed for Bristol. He's a young man, perhaps in his 20s, with the same dignified bearing as the chief, but dressed in an intriguing mixture of native and European clothing. Buckskin leggings with a fine English coat, moccasins with silver buckles. Mrs. Powys receives him with formal courtesy. Matawaka, welcome. The children are just waking from their nap. Thank you, he replies in clear, accented English. Chief Tomochichi wished me to bring these gifts for the royal children before we leave England. He presents two beautifully crafted items, a tiny bow and arrow set made of polished wood for Prince George, and a doll dressed in Creek clothing for Princess Augusta. These are magnificent, Mrs. Powys says, examining them carefully, checking for any danger, you realise, though she does so discreetly. The children will treasure them. When Prince George is brought in, he immediately reaches for the miniature bow with excited hands. Matawaka kneels to his level, showing the little prince how to hold it properly. In our tradition, a boy receives his first bow at age 3, he explains, to learn patience and skill early. You notice how naturally Matawaka interacts with the children, without the stiffness or artificial enthusiasm many courtiers display. Princess Augusta, now awake and in Mary's arms, watches the visitor with solemn interest. Would you like to hold her? Mary asks, surprising you with this breach of protocol. Matawaka looks uncertainly at Mrs. Powys, who hesitates but then nods permission. With careful movements, he takes the princess, supporting her head perfectly. She has strong eyes, he observes. In our tribe, we would say she has an old soul. You seem comfortable with children, you say, then blush at your boldness in speaking directly to a visitor. But Mataka smiles, without offence. I have 3 younger sisters at home, and among my people, all adults share in caring for children. Not like here, where it seems only certain people may touch or speak to them. This gentle critique of European child-rearing customs might have offended some, but Mrs. Powys simply nods. Different nations, different ways, though I sometimes think our royal children might benefit from more holding and less ceremony. It's a startlingly candid admission from the usually proper head nursemaid, and you wonder if there's something about Matawaka's straightforward manner that encourages such honesty. After presenting the gifts and spending a little time with the children, Matawaka prepares to leave. At the door, he pauses. Chief Tomochichi asked me to tell you something, he says to Mrs. Elliot, who has joined the gathering. He said the true measure of a nation is not in its grand buildings or the gold of its kings, but in how it cares for its children. He was pleased to see that even here, in this palace of stone and gold, there are people who understand this truth. The compliment clearly touches Mrs. Elliot, who inclines her head in acknowledgement. Please convey our thanks to the chief and our wishes for a safe journey home. After Matawaka's departure, the nursery returns to its routine. The children play with their new gifts under supervision. Preparations begin for their evening meal, and the endless cycle of cleaning, feeding, and organising continues. As you help Mary fold fresh napkins for tomorrow, she nudges you gently. So, tea with Mrs. Elliot and Mehmet? You're rising quickly in the palace hierarchy. I'm not sure what to think about their proposal, you admit quietly. Mary nods understandingly. Information is currency here. Everyone trades in it. The only question is who benefits from your knowledge. She smooths a napkin with practiced hands. Just remember, the walls in this palace literally have eyes and ears. Those paintings on the king's staircase? All real people watching the comings and goings? Not so different from what Mrs. Elliot and Mehmet are suggesting. It's an apt comparison that gives you a new way of thinking about the offer. Perhaps this network of servants sharing information is simply a human version of the palace's physical design. Eyes and ears everywhere, observing, reporting, protecting. As evening falls and the children are prepared for bed, you find yourself watching the nursery interactions with new awareness, the way Mrs. Powys subtly assesses every visitor, how Mrs. Elliot notes which items the royal parents touch or comment on during their brief visits. The careful attention Mary pays to casual remarks made by the drawing master about other noble children he teaches. Everyone is already collecting information. The only difference is what they do with it afterward. When the children are finally asleep, their tiny royal bodies nestled in cradles worth more than your family's farm, you retreat to your small private chamber. Through your window you can see lights still burning in the staterooms, where the adult world of the court continues its nightly dance of politics and pleasure. Tomorrow will bring new visitors, new challenges, new pieces of the palace puzzle to understand. But for now, in the quiet of the nursery wing, surrounded by the soft breathing of sleeping royal children, you have a moment to consider your place in this complex world of servants and masters, of power seen and unseen. Whatever you decide about Mrs. Elliot and Mehmet's offer, you're beginning to understand that palace service is far more than simply cleaning floors and carrying trays. It's about witnessing history from the shadows, about the quiet influence of those who are supposedly powerless, about the strength found in unlikely alliances. As you prepare for sleep in your unprecedented private room, you realize how far you've come from that first morning of hauling coal and emptying chamber pots. The royal nursery, with its unique position between the public pageantry and private reality of court life, has opened your eyes to possibilities you never imagined when you first walked through the servants' entrance of Kensington Palace. Weeks pass, and the rhythm of nursery life becomes your new normal. Your body, once aching from hauling coal and scrubbing floors, now feels the different strain of carrying royal babies and racing after an increasingly mobile Prince George. You know the children's schedules by heart, can predict Princess Augusta's hungry cry from her tired one, and have mastered the art of pressing tiny royal garments to perfection. But beyond these practical skills, you've developed a keener eye for the subtler aspects of palace life. You notice which courtiers Mrs. Elliot treats with genuine respect versus polite distance. You observe how Mehmet's visits, though ostensibly about the king's inquiries regarding his grandchildren, always include private conversations with Mrs. Elliot. You see how information travels through the palace, not in straight lines but in curious zigzags, whispered from lady's maid to valet, from cook to groom, from nursemaid to steward. You haven't yet given Mrs. Elliot and Mehmet a clear answer about joining their network, but you've begun sharing small observations with them, nothing that feels like betrayal, just useful insights about nursery visitors and overheard conversations. Lady Carlton spent 20 minutes praising the prince's drawing skills yesterday, you tell Mrs. Elliot during your now regular afternoon tea. She mentioned her husband hopes for the ambassadorship to Venice at least 3 times. Mrs. Elliot nods thoughtfully. Interesting. Lord Carlton was bitterly critical of the King's Hanover policy last month. Now suddenly his wife is cultivating royal favour through the children, a change in political winds, perhaps. These conversations feel like lessons in palace politics, with Mrs. Elliot helping you interpret the significance of behaviours you might otherwise dismiss as meaningless. Today's nursery schedule includes an unusual visitor. Dr. Arbuthnot, the King's physician, is coming to check the children's health. Though officially a routine visit, there are whispers of smallpox cases in London, and the royal family is taking no chances. The Queen herself had the children inoculated against smallpox, Mrs. Powys tells you, as you help prepare the day nursery for the doctor's visit. Very forward-thinking, not everyone approves of the practice. Inoculated, you ask, unfamiliar with the term. It's a Turkish method, originally, Mrs. Powys explains, taking a small amount of matter from someone with mild smallpox and introducing it to a healthy person through a cut in the skin. It causes a mild case that protects against the deadly kind. Turkish? You repeat, making the connection. Like Mehmet? Mrs. Powys nods. Indeed. He advocated for it strongly with the king. His own family in Turkey used the practice for generations. The Queen listened and had all the royal children treated. Quite controversial at the time. This is a side of Mehmet you hadn't considered, not just the king's valet and a political operator, but someone who brought life-saving medical knowledge from his homeland to protect the royal family. The man becomes more complex with everything you learn. Dr. Arbuthnot arrives promptly at 11, a dignified figure in a well-cut but unstylish coat carrying a black leather medical bag. Unlike many who visit the nursery, he doesn't put on airs or speak in exaggerated tones to the children. Instead, he examines them with gentle efficiency, talking to them normally while checking their pulses, looking in their mouths and feeling their glands. Both in excellent health, he pronounces after examining Princess Augusta. The princess's tooth is coming in nicely, and the prince's lungs are clear and strong. As he packs up his instruments, he addresses Mrs. Elliot directly. I've recommended to the Queen that the children spend more time outdoors, even in cooler weather. The fresh air will benefit them more than keeping them constantly indoors. We take them to the private gardens when weather permits, Mrs. Elliot replies, though Mrs. Powys worries about chills. Dr. Arbuthnot makes a dismissive gesture. Bundle them properly and let them breathe God's air. It's the constant stale indoor air that breeds illness, not a brisk walk in the garden. He turns his attention to you and the other nursery servants. And how are you all faring? Any coughs, fevers, rashes among the staff? His concern for the servants' health seems genuine, unusual among the upper ranks of palace visitors who typically look through you as if you're invisible. All well, doctor, Mrs. Elliot assures him. I insist on the highest standards of cleanliness among my staff. After he leaves, Mary explains that Dr. Arbuthnot is known for treating servants and nobles with equal seriousness. He says disease doesn't respect rank, so neither should medicine. Quite radical, really. The doctor's visit prompts a change in the nursery routine. Daily excursions to the palace gardens are now mandatory, regardless of weather. This afternoon, bundled against the February chill, you help carry Princess Augusta while Mary holds Prince George's hand as he toddles along the gravelled paths of the private royal garden. Unlike the grand public areas of Kensington Gardens, this small enclosed space is designed for the royal family's personal use. High walls provide privacy, and the formal design includes sheltered areas where the children can play protected from wind. The princess needs sun on her face, Mrs. Elliot declares, positioning the baby's cradle in a patch of weak winter sunlight. Doctor's orders. Prince George, delighted with this new freedom, races unsteadily along the paths, occasionally stopping to examine a dormant rosebush or pick up a pebble that catches his eye. "Careful, Your Highness," Mary calls as he veers too close to a small ornamental pond. The water's very cold. You're enjoying the crisp air yourself, a pleasant change from the closed, overheated rooms of the palace, when you notice a figure watching from an upper window. Even at this distance, you recognise Mehmet's distinctive silhouette. "He checks on us often," Mrs. Elliot says, following your gaze. The king rarely asks directly about the children, but Mehmet keeps him informed. Does the king not care about his grandchildren? You ask, finding this difficult to understand. Mrs. Elliot considers her answer carefully. It's not that simple. Royal affection is complicated by politics and protocol. The king has a strained relationship with his son, the children's father. Showing too much interest in the grandchildren might be seen as undermining paternal authority. This glimpse into royal family dynamics, just as fraught and complex as any families, but played out on a public stage with political implications, helps you understand why the seemingly cold formality of royal parenting might not reflect the true feelings involved. As dusk approaches, you return to the warmth of the nursery. The outdoor excursion has done the children good. Both have healthy pink cheeks and fall asleep easily after their supper. With the royal charges peacefully slumbering, the nursery staff can take their evening meal and enjoy a brief period of relaxation. Tonight, however, brings an unexpected invitation. Mrs. Elliot finds you as you're finishing your dinner in the nursery antechamber. "Mehmet has requested your presence," she says quietly. "There's a gathering of certain trusted servants in his quarters tonight. He thinks it's time you met the others." Your stomach tightens with a mixture of anxiety and curiosity. This invitation clearly signals that you're being formally brought into their network. What kind of gathering, you ask? "Nothing sinister," Mrs. Elliot says with a small smile. "Just supper and conversation among those who understand how the palace truly works. Mary will stay with the children. I'll accompany you." Mehmet's quarters, you discover, are far more spacious and luxurious than typical servant accommodations. Located in a quiet wing near the king's private apartments, his rooms more closely resemble a modest gentleman's residence than a valet's quarters, another sign of his unusual status. When you arrive, several others are already present. Mrs. Elliot makes the introductions. James Wilson, the King's head groom, Sarah Mitchell, lady's maid to the influential Duchess of Marlborough, Thomas Hawkins, under-butler with responsibility for the King's private dining, and Elizabeth Schultz, a German woman who serves as translator and secretary to the Queen. They greet you with varying degrees of warmth but shared curiosity. You're clearly the youngest and most junior servant among them, making your inclusion notable. "Our newest associate," Mehmet explains as he welcomes you, "currently serving in the royal nursery, where she's shown exceptional observational skills." The gathering feels surprisingly normal. A simple but excellent supper is served, far better than standard servant fare. Wine is poured, a luxury you've rarely tasted, and conversation flows freely. These servants, you realise, speak differently among themselves than they do in their official roles, more directly, more intelligently, with none of the affected deference they show to their masters. "The Spanish negotiations are faltering," Thomas remarks, sipping his wine. "The ambassador barely touched his food at dinner yesterday and argued with Lord Harrington in the corridor afterward. The Queen is concerned," Elizabeth adds. "I translated 3 letters from Madrid this week, all with increasingly forceful language. And yet the King plans another hunting trip to Richmond," James says with a slight frown. "Poor timing, politically speaking." You listen, fascinated by this unfettered discussion of matters you'd assumed were far above servants' concern. No one seems troubled by sharing such information. Indeed, they exchange these insights as naturally as housemaids might discuss laundry methods. "What about the nursery?" Sarah asks, turning to you. "Any interesting visitors lately?" Put on the spot, you hesitate before offering. "The French ambassador's wife visited yesterday. She spent a long time asking Mrs. Powys about the prince's daily schedule and seemed particularly interested in who has regular access to the children." This seemingly innocuous observation causes a ripple of interest around the table. "Did she indeed?" Mehmet muses, curious when her husband is supposedly focusing on colonial boundaries in America. The children's routine should hardly concern French diplomatic interests, unless they're looking for points of access or vulnerability, Thomas suggests. "Not necessarily sinister, but worth noting." "I'll mention it to Mrs. Powys," Mrs. Elliot says. "We should perhaps be more guarded about nursery schedules with foreign visitors." The evening continues in this vein. Observations shared, patterns identified, small adjustments to behaviour suggested. No grand conspiracies, no treasonous plotting, just vigilant servants pooling their unique vantage points to create a more complete picture of palace dynamics. As the gathering winds down, Mehmet addresses you directly. "You've been quiet, taking it all in. What do you think of our little assembly?" All eyes turn to you, and you choose your words carefully. It seems sensible. Everyone here serves the royal family loyally, but also protects themselves and each other through shared knowledge. Mehmet nods, apparently pleased with this assessment. Precisely. We are not plotting against our masters, but ensuring our own security in a world where servants are often treated as disposable. Information shared is power distributed. As you and Mrs. Elliot walk back to the nursery through the darkened palace corridors, she explains more about the group's origins. It began with Mehmet and myself years ago, she says, both outsiders in different ways. He as a Turkish prisoner of war brought to court as a curiosity. I, as a common woman, elevated through the intimate bond of nursing royal children. We recognized our mutual vulnerability and strength. And the others, you ask? Added gradually, carefully. Each occupies a position that gives them access to particular streams of information. Together, we form a more complete picture than any single person could. What happens if someone betrays the group? Mrs. Elliot's expression turns serious. It hasn't happened yet. The benefits of membership are too valuable to risk. But if it did, she leaves the consequence unstated, but her tone suggests it would be severe. When you return to the nursery, all is quiet, the children sleeping peacefully under Mary's watchful eye. As you prepare for bed in your small private chamber, you reflect on the evening and what joining this network might mean for your future. The palace suddenly seems both smaller and larger. Smaller because you now see the connections between its disparate parts, larger because you glimpse the extent of the world it influences, from Spanish negotiations to colonial boundaries, from diplomatic marriages to military decisions. The great machine of empire runs through these ornate rooms, and servants like you oil its gears. Sleep eludes you as you weigh your decision. The practical benefits are clear. Protection, advancement, allies in a place where a servant alone is vulnerable. But there are risks too. The higher you rise, the further you can fall. And while nothing you've witnessed suggests disloyalty to the crown, you wonder where the line between information sharing and intrigue might ultimately be drawn. A soft knock interrupts your thoughts. Opening your door cautiously, you find Mary looking anxious. "The princess has a fever," she whispers. "Mrs. Elliot wants you to help prepare cool compresses while I fetch Dr. Arbuthnot." All considerations about servant networks instantly fade as you hurry to the night nursery. Princess Augusta lies in her cradle, cheeks flushed, tiny body radiating heat. Mrs. Elliot is already bathing the baby's forehead with a damp cloth, her normally composed features tight with concern. "How long has she been like this?" you ask, quickly preparing more cool cloths as instructed. "It came on suddenly," Mrs. Elliot replies. "She was perfectly well at bedtime. Now she's burning up." The next hours pass in a blur of urgent activity. Dr. Arbuthnot arrives in his nightclothes, having rushed from his bed at Mary's summons. His examination is swift but thorough. "Teething fever, most likely," he pronounces, though he doesn't look entirely convinced. "Continue with the cool compresses. I've brought a tincture of willow bark. Give her 3 drops every 4 hours. If she worsens before morning, send for me immediately." As the doctor prepares to leave, Mrs. Elliot asks the question weighing on everyone's mind. "Could it be smallpox, doctor, despite the inoculation?" "Or unlikely," he replies. "The inoculation was successful and she shows none of the characteristic signs, but watch for any rash or pustules and isolate her from the prince as a precaution." The night becomes an endless cycle of cooling compresses, tiny spoonfuls of willow bark tincture, and anxious monitoring of the princess's breathing. You, Mrs. Elliot, and Mary take turns sitting with her, never leaving her alone for a moment. During your watch, around 3 in the morning, the baby's fever seems to spike. Her small body burns against your hand, and her breathing becomes more laboured. Alarmed, you call for Mrs. Elliot, who immediately sends Mary to wake Dr. Arbuthnot again. "Should we inform the parents?" you ask, thinking of protocol. Mrs. Elliot shakes her head. "Not yet. The doctor first. Royal sleep isn't disturbed without absolute certainty of need." This strikes you as backward. Surely parents would want to know when their child is ill, but you're learning that royal parenting follows different rules. Dr. Arbuthnot returns, looking graver than before. His examination is even more meticulous this time, checking every inch of the princess's skin for signs of rash. The fever is concerning, he admits, but I still believe it's teething related, perhaps complicated by a minor winter ague. I've brought a different preparation, honey and lavender with a touch of laudanum to help her rest. As he prepares the medicine, Mrs. Elliot takes a moment to check on Prince George, who miraculously remains asleep through all this commotion. When she returns, she looks troubled. He seems well, but as a precaution, I think we should move him to the furthest chamber until we're certain about the princess's condition. You help Mary carefully transfer the sleeping prince to another room, well away from his sister's sickbed. The night nursery, normally so peaceful, has transformed into something like a field hospital, with medicines, compresses, and anxious attendants focused on the tiny patient. Dawn approaches with agonizing slowness. The princess's fever remains high but hasn't worsened further. Dr. Arbuthnot, who has stayed through the night rather than returning to his bed, looks exhausted but vigilant. If there's no improvement by morning, I'll recommend informing their majesties, he says, and I'll bring Dr. Mead for consultation. The mention of a second doctor underscores the seriousness of the situation. Royal children have died from seemingly minor illnesses throughout history, and despite medical advances, their lives remain precarious. As grey light finally seeps through the nursery windows, Princess Augusta's fever breaks. The change is dramatic. Her flushed skin cools, her breathing eases, and she falls into a natural, peaceful sleep rather than the restless dozing of the feverish. Dr. Arbuthnot checks her again, relief evident on his tired face. The crisis has passed, I believe. Continue with the willow bark for today, but I think the worst is behind us. Mrs. Elliot sinks into a chair, the strain of the night visible in the slump of her shoulders. "Thank God," she murmurs. "I feared—" She doesn't finish the sentence, but she doesn't need to. Everyone in the nursery understands what a royal child's death would mean. Not just personal grief, but political upheaval, questions of succession, and inevitable blame falling on those responsible for the child's care. As the palace begins to wake around you, life returning to its normal rhythms beyond the nursery walls, you realise something important has shifted during this long night of crisis. Watching Mrs. Elliot's genuine distress, Dr. Arbuthnot's dedicated care, and even feeling your own overwhelming relief at the princess's recovery, you understand that the network of palace servants isn't just about power or self-protection. It's also about caring for these royal children when their own parents cannot or will not. It's about the nursemaids and doctors and valets who stand in the gap between official protocol and human needs. It's about creating a hidden foundation of support beneath the visible structure of monarchy, and you, somehow, have become part of it. Morning brings both exhaustion and relief to the royal nursery. Princess Augusta's fever has broken completely, and she wakes with her usual appetite and bright eyes, showing no signs of the crisis that kept everyone awake through the night. Prince George, returned to his normal sleeping quarters, remains blissfully unaware that anything unusual occurred. Children recover quickly, Dr. Arbuthnot observes before taking his leave. Their resilience puts us adults to shame. Only the dark circles under the nursery staff's eyes betray the night's drama. Mrs. Elliot, who hasn't slept at all, still insists on maintaining normal routines. Structure is essential for children, she says, stifling a yawn as she oversees Princess Augusta's morning feeding. And for the rest of us too, if I'm honest. By midday, word of the princess's brief illness has spread through the palace's whisper network. Mehmet appears in the nursery doorway, ostensibly delivering a message from the king, but clearly there to assess the situation himself. His Majesty inquires after his granddaughter's health, he announces formally. For the benefit of anyone listening, please inform His Majesty that the princess has recovered completely from a mild teething fever. Mrs. Elliot replies with equal formality. But as Mehmet turns to leave, he catches your eye and gives an almost imperceptible nod of approval. You realize that your actions during the night, staying calm, following instructions precisely, putting the children's welfare above all else, have been noted and valued by this network you're increasingly part of. The next few days pass in a blur of normal nursery activities, though you and the other staff catch sleep in shifts to recover from the night vigil. You find yourself watching Princess Augusta with extra vigilance, but there's no sign of returning fever or any other symptom. On Sunday, as scheduled regardless of recent events, both King and Queen make their formal weekly visit to the nursery. It's a more elaborate affair than the Queen's casual visits, with proper protocol observed. The children are dressed in their finest clothes, the nursery is immaculately prepared, and the staff stand at formal attention. You've witnessed these Sunday visits before, but this time you notice subtle differences in how information is managed. Dr. Arbuthnot has provided Mrs. Elliot with a carefully worded account of the princess's slight indisposition, enough to be honest without causing alarm. Mrs. Powys has ensured that Prince George can demonstrate a new skill, correctly identifying 3 letters of the alphabet, to please his grandfather. Mary has the Cherokee doll prominently positioned among Princess Augusta's toys, knowing the Queen will be gratified to see diplomatic gifts being used. Every detail is orchestrated to create a specific impression for the royal parents, that their children are thriving, that international relations are positive, that illness was minor and expertly handled. Not lies, exactly, but a curated version of reality designed to reassure while also highlighting the nursery staff's competence. You realise this careful management of information is exactly what Mehmet and Mrs. Elliot described in their network, control over what flows upward to power as well as what flows downward from it. The royal visit proceeds exactly as planned. King George, resplendent in a blue coat with silver embroidery, spends precisely 12 minutes with his grandchildren. He nods approvingly at Prince George's recitation of AMK, not the correct order of the alphabet, but impressive for a 2-year-old nonetheless, presents both children with small silver trinkets and departs with a satisfied air. Queen Caroline stays longer, as she always does. She asks specific questions about the princess's health, listens carefully to Mrs. Elliot's diplomatic explanation, and studies her granddaughter with genuine concern in her eyes. "You handled it well," she tells Mrs. Elliot, with a glance that includes you and Mary. "Children fall ill suddenly, and we must simply manage as best we can." There's something in her tone, a hint of personal understanding perhaps, that makes you wonder if the Queen's formal distance from her grandchildren isn't entirely her choice. Royal protocol, dynastic politics, and the demands of court life may constrain her natural inclinations, just as they do everyone else in this gilded cage. After the royals depart, Mrs. Elliot calls you to her private chamber. To your surprise, Mehmet is already there, seated with a cup of tea. "You've proven yourself these past weeks," Mrs. Elliot says without preamble. "Particularly during the princess's illness. We'd like to formalise your position in our arrangement." Mehmet nods. "You understand now what we do and why. Are you willing to commit to it fully?" The question hangs in the air between you. Despite weeks of consideration, you find yourself hesitating at this final step. What exactly would that mean? "Regular attendance at our gatherings," Mehmet explains, "sharing what you observe in the nursery, visitors, conversations, patterns. In return, advancement in your position, protection from the usual vagaries of servant life, and a network of allies throughout the palace." "And if I decline?" you ask carefully. "You remain in the nursery," Mrs. Elliot says. "No penalty, no loss of position. But no further advancement either, and no special protection if difficulties arise." It's a fair offer, presented without threat or coercion. The decision remains yours, and they seem content to let you make it without pressure. "I accept," you say finally. "I've seen enough to understand the value of your network, to others and to myself." Mehmet smiles, a rare, full expression rather than his usual careful half smile. Good. We begin immediately with a test of your observational skills. He produces a small notebook from his pocket. Tell me about the Spanish ambassador's most recent nursery visit, every detail you can recall. For the next hour, they question you about various nursery visitors, testing not just your memory, but your ability to interpret behaviors and identify patterns. It's exhausting, but also strangely exhilarating to have your observations taken so seriously. You have a natural talent for this, Mehmet concludes as the session ends. Most people see without observing. You observe. This marks the beginning of your formal integration into the palace's hidden hierarchy. Over the following months, your role evolves beyond basic nursery duties. You become a conduit for information, discreetly noting which courtiers show genuine interest in the children versus those merely going through the motions of royal obligation, tracking patterns of visits that might indicate shifting political alliances, observing which foreign diplomats the Queen favours with private nursery audiences. Spring arrives, bringing warmer weather and more frequent excursions to the palace gardens. Princess Augusta takes her first steps under your watchful eye, while Prince George develops both his vocabulary and his strong-willed personality. The nursery remains your primary domain, but you now move through the palace with greater confidence and purpose, recognized by other network members with subtle nods of acknowledgement. Your weekly reports to Mehmet and Mrs. Elliot become a comfortable routine, as does your attendance at the network's private gatherings. You learn to filter information, distinguishing between the merely interesting and the truly significant, and to present your observations clearly but discreetly. You've found your place here, Anne tells you during one of her visits to the nursery. Your former mentor has watched your rise with a mixture of pride and wry amusement. Not bad for a farm girl who couldn't tell a footman from a groom 6 months ago. I had good teachers, you reply, thinking not just of Anne but of Mrs. Elliot, Mehmet, and even the palace itself with its endless lessons in power, hierarchy and survival. Summer brings a significant event to Kensington Palace, preparations for the royal family's move to Hampton Court for the season. The entire palace buzzes with activity as trunks are packed, inventories checked and arrangements made for the massive logistical undertaking of moving the court to another location. For the nursery staff, this means careful planning for the children's journey and setting up temporary quarters at Hampton Court. Every item must be accounted for, from Prince George's favourite wooden horse to Princess Augusta's special feeding cup. You'll come with us, of course, Mrs. Elliot informs you. Hampton Court has its own challenges and opportunities. The palace layout is different. The servants have their own established networks. You'll be my eyes and ears as we navigate the new environment. This promotion, from nursery assistant to Mrs. Elliot's trusted companion, represents a significant step up in both responsibility and status. Even Mrs. Powys, always proper and somewhat reserved, acknowledges your advancement with a respectful nod. The day before departure, Mehmet summons you to a final meeting at Kensington. To your surprise, it's not in his quarters, but in a small, plain room near the palace kitchens, a space so ordinary and overlooked that it's perfect for private conversation. Hampton Court presents new variables, he tells you without preliminary small talk. The network there is less established than ours. Trust no one until I indicate otherwise. Will you be there, you ask, having assumed the king's personal valet would naturally accompany him. Not immediately. The king visits his mistress in Richmond first, with minimal staff. I join the main court at Hampton later. He studies your face, as if assessing your readiness for increased responsibility. Until I arrive, you're Mrs. Elliot's primary connection to our Kensington network. The gravity of this trust sinks in. In just 6 months, you've gone from hauling coal as a housemaid to serving as a key link in the palace's most sophisticated servant network. The responsibility is both daunting and strangely satisfying. I understand, you tell him. I won't disappoint you or Mrs. Elliot. Mehmet nods, apparently satisfied. There's something else you should know. He lowers his voice, though the room is secure. The Cherokee delegation has returned from Bristol. They'll be received at Hampton Court next month for the final treaty negotiations. This news startles you. Tomochichi is coming back? Yes, and the king wants the children present for the formal treaty signing, a symbol of the future friendship between our nations. Mehmet's expression turns thoughtful. The nursery will suddenly become politically significant. Be exceptionally vigilant about who visits and what they say. The next morning dawns clear and warm, perfect weather for the royal procession to Hampton Court. The nursery children travel separately from the main court in a comfortable carriage with Mrs. Elliot, Mrs. Powys, yourself, and Mary. Prince George is excited by the adventure, pressing his face to the window to watch London roll by while Princess Augusta sleeps peacefully through much of the journey. As the carriage trundles along the Thames toward Hampton Court, Mrs. Elliot gazes thoughtfully at the river. 20 years I've been making this seasonal journey, she muses, first as a wet nurse, now as... She pauses, seemingly searching for the right term for her unique position. The heart of the nursery, Mary suggests with unexpected eloquence. Mrs. Elliot smiles at this. Perhaps. Though these little ones are its true heart. She adjusts Princess Augusta's blanket with a tenderness that belies her usual businesslike manner. They'll grow up, of course, move beyond our care, but what we give them now shapes what they become later. Even when they don't remember us, you ask, thinking of how young the royal children are, how unlikely to retain memories of their earliest caretakers. Especially then, Mrs. Elliot says firmly, the things we learn before we can remember learning them are the deepest lessons of all. It's a profound thought that stays with you as the carriage approaches Hampton Court. This magnificent Tudor palace, with its distinctive red brick facade and famous astronomical clock, will be your home for the next several months. New rooms, new routines, new challenges await. As servants bustle to unload carriages and establish the royal household in its summer residence, you help settle the children in their Hampton Court nursery. The space is different, larger windows, higher ceilings, more elaborate Tudor decorations, but you quickly work to make it familiar and comfortable for your royal charges. That evening, with the children asleep in their new surroundings, you find a moment to step outside into the palace gardens. The summer twilight is long and gentle, painting Hampton Court's formal gardens in soft gold and purple. Fountains play, casting diamond droplets into the air, and the famous maze of hedges creates mysterious shadows in the distance. From this quiet corner, you can see the palace windows glowing with candlelight as courtiers and servants establish their seasonal rhythms in this new location. Somewhere in those ornate rooms, kings and queens, diplomats and ministers make decisions that will shape empires. Treaties will be signed, alliances formed and broken, wars perhaps averted or declared. And here in the nursery, equally important work unfolds. The shaping of future monarchs, the protection of vulnerable royal children, the maintenance of an invisible support structure that allows the visible pageantry of court to function. 6 months ago, you arrived at Kensington Palace with nothing but the clothes on your back and a recommendation from a distant cousin. You knew nothing of court politics, servant networks, or the complex machinery of royal life. You were just another pair of hands to haul coal, empty chamber pots, and fade into the background. Now you stand in the gardens of Hampton Court as a trusted member of an elite servant circle, responsible for royal children, privy to palace secrets, and part of a sophisticated information network that spans 2 palaces and influences decisions at the highest levels of power. You've learned that real influence doesn't always announce itself with titles and ceremonies. Sometimes it moves quietly through servants' corridors, whispers in private chambers, and manifests in the seemingly small details of daily care. You've discovered that even in a world of rigid hierarchy and pompous protocol, human connections, a wet nurse's devotion, a valet's loyalty, a nursemaid's gentle hands, create the true foundation upon which the grand edifice of monarchy rests. As darkness finally falls over Hampton Court and you return to your duties, you carry this understanding with you. In the coming days, you'll witness treaty signings with Cherokee chiefs, navigate the politics of a different royal household, and continue your education in the hidden workings of power. But for now, in the quiet of the nursery night, watching over sleeping royal children who know nothing of their extraordinary destiny, you've found your own unexpected place in the great tapestry of Georgian court life, not at its glittering centre, but in its essential invisible foundation. And as palace clocks chime the hour across centuries of royal service, countless other servants, nameless in history books but essential to history's making, have stood exactly where you stand, doing the quiet, crucial work that allows empires to function, monarchs to rule, and life to continue in these magnificent, demanding royal palaces. 6 o'clock arrives too soon. You wake with a jolt at the sound of the bells, momentarily disoriented. It takes a few seconds to remember the events of last night. The drawing room, the Queen, your unexpected reassignment to the royal nursery. Royal Nursery Day. Anne mumbles from her palate, eyes still closed. Better get moving. Mrs. Elliot's known for punctuality. You dress quickly in your cleanest uniform, scrubbing your face and hands with extra care. Anne helps you tie your cap at a more flattering angle than usual. There, she says, stepping back to inspect you, almost presentable. I'm terrified, you admit. What if I do something wrong? What if the children don't like me? Anne snorts. They're royal babies, not dragons. Besides, you won't be alone with them. The wet nurse and nursemaids run the show. You're just an extra pair of hands. This doesn't entirely calm your nerves as you make your way through the palace to the royal nursery. Unlike the staterooms or even the family's private apartments, the nursery occupies its own wing, deliberately separated from the bustle and politics of court life. When you arrive, a stern-faced woman in a plain but well-made dress is waiting outside the door. "The new girl?" she asks without preamble. "Yes, ma'am," you reply with a curtsy. She looks you over critically. "I'm Mrs. Powys, head nursemaid to the royal children. Mrs. Elliot informed me you'd be joining us. Have you any experience with children?" "Some, ma'am. I helped with my younger siblings and cousins." Mrs. Powys makes a non-committal sound. "Country experience, I suppose. Well, royal children are rather different. Follow me, and I'll explain the rules." She leads you into an antechamber decorated in soft blues and creams, far more cheerful and comfortable than the grand formality of the staterooms. The nursery consists of 6 main rooms, Mrs. Powys explains. The day nursery, where the children play and take lessons. The night nursery, where they sleep. The wet nurse's chamber, the nursemaid's room, the schoolroom for the older children, and this receiving room where visitors, including the parents, are received. You try not to show your surprise at this last detail. The idea that royal parents would need to be received to see their own children seems strange, but you're learning that little about court life follows normal family patterns. The children rise at 7, Mrs. Powys continues. Their day follows a strict schedule of feeding, play, lessons, exercise, and rest. Your duties will include helping prepare their meals, maintaining their clothes and toys, assisting with bathing, and whatever else Mrs. Elliot requires. She fixes you with a stern look. Now, the most important rules. First, no one touches the royal children without explicit permission, not to pick them up, not to adjust their clothes, not even to wipe a smudge from their face. Only Mrs. Elliot, myself, and the designated nursemaids have that privilege. You nod, taking this seriously. Second, you will never be alone with the children, not for a moment. Third, every item of food must be tasted by a nursemaid before being given to a child. Fourth, anything the children touch must be scrupulously clean. And finally, what happens in the nursery stays in the nursery. The royal family's private life is not for gossip below stairs. Understood? "Yes, Mrs. Powys," you reply, slightly overwhelmed by these stringent protocols. "Good. Now come meet Mrs. Elliot and the children." She leads you through to the day nursery, a large, airy room with tall windows letting in the morning sun. The floor is covered with soft rugs, and child-sized furniture is arranged around the space. Toys, finer than anything you've seen before, are neatly organized on shelves. Wooden horses with real horsehair manes, miniature soldiers with actual silver swords, dolls dressed in silk and lace. In a comfortable chair near the window sits Catherine Elliot, the wet nurse you glimpsed in the servants' hall. She's cradling a baby of perhaps 6 months who's nursing contentedly at her breast. Nearby, a toddler of about 2 is being entertained by a young nursemaid with a wooden puppet. Mrs. Elliot, the new assistant, has arrived, Mrs. Powys announces. The wet nurse looks up and smiles, a warm, genuine expression that immediately puts you more at ease. "Ah, good. Come closer, girl. Let me look at you properly." You approach and curtsy, trying not to stare at the royal infant at her breast. "Mehmet spoke well of you," Mrs. Elliot says, studying your face. "Said you have good hands and a kind manner, both essential with children." "Thank you, ma'am," you reply, still confused by the Turkish valet's interest in your career. "This is Princess Augusta," Mrs. Elliot continues, nodding to the baby, "and that rascal over there is Prince George. You'll assist with both, though primarily with Augusta, as she's still nursing." You look at the children with new interest, realising you're in the presence of a future King of England, though the chubby-cheeked toddler playing with blocks seems far removed from the grand figure he'll one day become. "Have you worked with infants before?" Mrs. Elliot asks. "Yes, ma'am. My mother had 8 children, and I helped with the younger ones." "Good. Most girls coming from grand households have never so much as held a baby. Too fine for real work." There's a hint of contempt in her tone that suggests Mrs. Elliot doesn't think much of aristocratic child-rearing practices. The baby finishes nursing, and Mrs. Elliot expertly shifts her to her shoulder, patting the tiny back until a delicate burp emerges. "Here," she says, extending the infant toward you. "Hold her while I adjust myself." Your eyes widen in panic, remembering Mrs. Powys's strict rule about not touching the royal children. Mrs. Powys sighs from the doorway. It's allowed if Mrs. Elliot directs it. She has full authority over the princess's care. Still nervous, you carefully take the baby, supporting her head as you've done with your siblings. Princess Augusta regards you with solemn dark eyes, then reaches a tiny hand toward your face. "She likes you," Mrs. Elliot observes, retying her bodice. "Good sign, babies know more than we think." For the rest of the morning, you observe and assist with the nursery routine. It's both familiar and strange. The basic tasks of childcare are similar to what you've done before, but everything is elevated by the children's royal status. Their bathing water isn't merely heated, but tested with a special thermometer. Their napkins, diapers aren't ordinary linen, but the finest cotton, washed separately from all other laundry. Their food, Princess Augusta has just started on solid food to supplement nursing, is prepared by a dedicated cook and tested by multiple people before reaching the royal mouths. "Seems excessive," you whisper to Mary, a friendly nursemaid who's showing you how to properly fold the princess's napkins. "It's not just fussiness," Mary explains. "There've been plots against royal children before, poison, kidnapping. The security isn't just for show." This sobering thought makes you see the elaborate protocols differently. What had seemed like aristocratic indulgence was actually protection for vulnerable children born into dangerous positions. By midday, you've settled into a rhythm of helping where needed, fetching fresh napkins, preparing a simple rice pudding for Prince George's lunch, which must be tasted by 3 different people before he eats it, and learning the proper way to launder the children's delicate clothes. During the children's afternoon nap time, Mrs. Elliot invites you to take tea with her in her private chamber, a rare honour for a lowly assistant. "You're wondering why you're here," she says bluntly as she pours you a cup. Unlike below stairs, the nursery staff enjoy real tea rather than ale or water. You nod, not bothering to pretend otherwise. "Mehmet and I look out for promising servants," she explains, "those with potential beyond endless floor scrubbing. The palace runs on more than just the visible power of kings and courtiers. There's another current, the power of those who serve, who know secrets, who have the royal ear in intimate moments." She sips her tea thoughtfully. I was like you once, started as a common housemaid at Hampton Court, then became wet nurse to James when his mother couldn't be bothered with him. Now I have the Queen's confidence, private chambers, and a salary that would make Lord Harrington blink. Because you nursed the prince, you ask, fascinated by this glimpse into servant advancement. Because I made myself indispensable, she corrects. Royal children come and go from our care, but the bonds formed during those years last. James still visits me, tells me things he wouldn't tell his own mother, and the current royal children will do the same as they grow. She studies you over her teacup. Mehmet sees something in you, some quality worth cultivating. I'm inclined to trust his judgment. He was once a prisoner of war, you know. Now he controls the king's private purse and knows more state secrets than half the cabinet. This conversation is giving you a new perspective on palace service, not just as endless drudgery, but as a potential path to influence and security that might otherwise be impossible for someone of your station. What's expected of me, you ask cautiously. Mrs. Elliot smiles. For now, simply learn the nursery routine, care for the children well, observe everything, say little. The rest will follow naturally if you're as clever as Mehmet thinks. Your tea is interrupted by the sound of Princess Augusta crying from the night nursery. Mrs. Elliot sighs and sets down her cup. Duty calls. She's teething, poor lamb, makes her fractious. You follow Mrs. Elliot to the night nursery, where the princess is indeed awake and unhappy, her little face red with discomfort. Mrs. Elliot lifts her from the ornate cradle, a miniature four-poster bed, really, and begins to rock her gently. Fetch the coral teething stick, she instructs you, in the silver box on the dresser. You find the item, a piece of smooth coral mounted in silver, clearly expensive, and made specifically for royal gums to gnaw on. Mrs. Elliot takes it and offers it to the fussing princess, who gratefully begins to chew, her cries subsiding to occasional whimpers. There now, Mrs. Elliot soothes. Better already. As she comforts the baby, a soft knock sounds at the nursery door. Mrs. Powys answers it and then enters the night nursery, her expression carefully neutral. Her Majesty the Queen wishes to see the children, she announces. Mrs. Elliot nods, unsurprised. Tell her we'll receive her in the day nursery in 5 minutes. The princess needs changing first. You're slightly shocked at this response. Making the Queen wait seems unthinkable. But Mrs. Elliot notices your expression and smiles. Even queens defer to nursery schedules, she says. Caroline understands that. Now, help me change this napkin quickly. The next few minutes are a flurry of activity as Princess Augusta is changed, her face gently washed and her gown straightened. Prince George, who has woken from his nap, is similarly tidied by Mary and another nursemaid. The children are then brought to the day nursery and arranged in a charming tableau. The prince with his wooden soldiers, the princess propped in a small chair with a rattle. When everything is perfect, Mrs. Powys nods to a footman waiting by the door. He steps out briefly, then returns to announce Her Majesty Queen Caroline. Everyone curtsies deeply as the Queen enters. She's dressed more simply than at last night's drawing room, wearing a day dress of blue silk without the enormous hoops, though still elegant enough to mark her royal status. Mrs. Elliot, she greets the wet nurse warmly. How are my darlings today? Very well, Your Majesty, Mrs. Elliot replies. The prince has mastered 3 new words, and the princess is cutting her first tooth. Queen Caroline smiles and moves to Prince George, who looks up at her with recognition, but not the excitement a child might show for a mother they see daily. Their interaction has the quality of a pleasant visit rather than a maternal reunion. Has he been good? The Queen asks, watching as the prince stacks blocks. Very good, Your Majesty, Mrs. Elliot assures her. He's quick to learn his letters. Excellent. His father will be pleased. The Queen then turns her attention to Princess Augusta, cooing at the baby briefly before straightening up. The Spanish ambassador's wife has been asking to see them, perhaps next week if they're well. As Your Majesty wishes, Mrs. Elliot replies, though perhaps not if the princess's teething worsens. The Queen nods, accepting this limitation without question. Of course, you know best. I leave it to your judgment. After a few more minutes of conversation about the children's health and progress, during which the Queen maintains a polite distance from her offspring, she prepares to leave. I trust they are in good hands as always, she says to Mrs. Elliot. Oh, and this must be the new girl Mehmet mentioned. She turns her gaze to you. You curtsy again, face burning with the unexpected attention. I hope you are settling in well, the Queen says. Mrs. Elliot runs the finest royal nursery in Europe. You will learn much here. Thank you, Your Majesty, you manage to reply. With that, the Queen departs, leaving a lingering scent of French perfume behind her. The visit has lasted less than 15 minutes. Is that normal, you ask hesitantly, once the Queen has gone? Such a brief visit. Mrs. Elliot nods, lifting Princess Augusta to check her napkin again. Perfectly normal. Royal parents aren't like commoners. They produce heirs, then leave the actual raising to professionals. The Queen visits perhaps 3 times a week for a few minutes. The King, less often. This seems sad to you, but no one else in the nursery appears to find it unusual. The children know us better than their parents, Mary says matter-of-factly as she helps Prince George with a wooden puzzle. Mrs. Elliot is more mother to them than the Queen. Mrs. Elliot gives her a sharp look. Mind your tongue, Mary. The Queen is a good mother in her own way. She ensures they have the best of everything, including care. The rest of the afternoon passes in a continuation of the nursery routine. You help prepare the children's simple supper, assist with their evening bath, though you're still not permitted to touch them directly during this process, and learn how to properly air their bedding. By the time the children are settled for the night at 7 o'clock, extraordinarily early by adult court standards, you've gained a new appreciation for the unique world of the royal nursery. It's a strange blend of extreme privilege and careful restraint, of lavish surroundings and practical sense. You'll sleep here now, Mrs. Elliot informs you as the children doze in the night nursery under Mary's watchful eye. There's a small chamber off the nursemaid's room for you. Your things have already been brought up from the servants' attic. This is another unexpected perk of your new position. Escaping the crowded attic dormitory for a private sleeping space, however small, is a luxury few palace servants enjoy. You've done well today, Mrs. Elliot adds, quick to learn, careful with the children, not too chatty. Keep it up. You thank her, pleased with the praise, but still somewhat bemused by the rapid change in your circumstances. Just a week ago, you were a farm girl, arriving at Kensington Palace for the first time. Now you're sleeping in the royal nursery, trusted, at least partially, with future monarchs. Your new chamber, though tiny, is indeed private, a luxury you've never experienced. There's a narrow bed with a real mattress rather than a straw pallet, a small chest for your few belongings, and even a tiny window that offers a view of the palace gardens. As you prepare for bed, there's a soft knock at your door. It's Mary, the friendly nursemaid. Settling in? She asks, glancing around your room. Not bad, is it? Better than the attics with the rats and drafts. Much better, you agree, though I still don't understand why I was chosen for this position. Mary perches on the edge of your bed. Curious, isn't it? But that's how it works here. Palace advancement isn't always about time served or even ability. Sometimes it's about who notices you. She lowers her voice. Mehmet and Mrs. Elliot have an understanding. They place people loyal to them in key positions throughout the palace, makes them stronger. Am I supposed to be loyal to them? You ask, somewhat alarmed at being caught in what sounds like palace servant politics. Mary shrugs. Everyone's loyal to someone, better them than some of the others. They're fair at least, and they remember those who help them. She rises to leave. Just a friendly word of advice. Lord Carteret's valet, Jenkins, might ask you questions about what you see in the nursery, especially after royal visits. He's fishing for his master, who's always trying to gauge his standing with the king and queen. Don't tell him anything. I wouldn't, you assure her. Good, because Mrs. Elliot finds out everything eventually. Sleep well, tomorrow's bathing day for the prince, which means puddles everywhere. With a friendly wink, she slips out, closing your door behind her. Alone at last, you lie on your bed, a real bed, not a pallet, and try to make sense of the day's events. The royal nursery, with its strange blend of luxury and practicality, the children simultaneously ordinary in their needs and extraordinary in their destiny. The complex web of alliances and rivalries among the servants, a shadow version of the court politics above stairs. From the night nursery nearby, you hear the soft sounds of Princess Augusta fussing briefly before settling back to sleep. Even royal babies have bad dreams, it seems. Outside your window, the palace gardens are silvered by moonlight, formal patterns of hedge and flower bed creating geometric shadows across the lawns. Somewhere out there, courtiers are still awake, gambling, gossiping, plotting in the staterooms that never truly sleep. But here in the nursery wing, removed from the adult world of the court, there's a peaceful quiet that you haven't experienced since arriving at Kensington. The bubble of childhood innocence extends to you now, a temporary respite from the harsher realities of servant life. As you drift towards sleep on your unexpected bed of privilege, you wonder what the morning will bring in this strangest of all palace departments, where future kings and queens gurgle and crawl, blissfully unaware of the power they will one day wield, while servants, like you, shape their earliest experiences of the world.